Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. It was one of those nights where I couldn't sleep and the house just felt too small. The air inside was warm and still, even though it was early October and the temperature had started dropping at night. I took my old fleece blanket, a thermos of tea, and my binoculars out to the backyard around 1 a.m. It wasn't anything serious. I'm not an astronomer or anything. But sometimes I like looking up, especially when it's quiet and the sky's clear. I live in a pretty rural part of Oregon outside a little town called Lebanon. Not a lot of light pollution out here. You can still see the Milky Way on a good night. That night was one of those. No moon, no wind, and the sky was sharp and full. I laid back on the lawn chair with a blanket over my legs and just watched for a while. The binoculars weren't great, old Nikon pair I got at a garage sale, but they work fine for stargazing. I was mostly scanning the eastern part of the sky, where I could see Orion coming up. It's always been my favorite. I was focusing on the belt when I noticed a cluster of lights higher up, a little off to the right. They weren't stars. Too low, and they had this weird bluish tint. Not pure white like stars, not blinking like planes. They were in a loose triangle, kind of wide and uneven. I assumed they were drones at first. People around here fly them sometimes, even late. But these weren't moving the way drones usually do. I watched them for maybe a minute or two. They just hovered, staying perfectly still, and I was starting to lose interest until they all shifted at once. Not a slow movement, just snap, a new formation. Like someone rearranged them instantly. They went from a triangle to a perfect straight line, equidistant. I lowered the binoculars and blinked a few times, thinking maybe I'd misjudged it. When I looked again, they'd shifted again. Now they were in a square. Still not moving otherwise, no sound, no trails, nothing. That's when it started feeling wrong. I sat up straighter, resting the binoculars on my knees. My tea was still warm, untouched. The air around me suddenly felt a little thicker. It's hard to explain, like the pressure changed. I felt it before, right before thunderstorms, but this was different. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. I went back to the binoculars. The lights hadn't moved again, still in that square. But now they were pulsing, just slightly, fading in and out in sync. Not like blinking. It was smoother, almost like breathing. I got up and took a few steps farther into the yard to get away from the tree line. My feet were cold through my socks, but I didn't want to go back in. I didn't want to take my eyes off those lights. I had this, not a fear exactly, but this heavy feeling that if I stopped watching, I'd miss something I wasn't supposed to. After maybe 30 seconds of that pulsing, they started to move. All four lights drifted apart evenly, staying on the same plane. No sudden shifts this time, just a slow glide outward, like petals opening. Then they froze again, and then without warning, they all shot straight up. I don't mean they got smaller gradually like a plane climbing, they just disappeared. Upward. Gone. I lowered the binoculars, the sky looked normal again. I stood there for a minute, not sure what I'd seen. It was like everything just clicked back into place. I thought maybe it had been military. I've heard jets and helicopters fly over before. But this was different. No engine noise, no delay between movement and sight. Just gone. I stayed outside a while longer, scanning the sky again, but there was nothing. The stars were back to being just stars. I finally went inside around 2:30, locked up behind me, even though I always feel silly doing that out here. The dog, Linny, didn't even get up from her bed when I came in. Usually she barks when I've been out for a while, but not that time. She just looked at me like she knew I'd seen something. The next day I went online to check for reports. No power outages, no weather anomalies, no chatter about lights in the sky. I called my neighbor Mel, who sometimes keeps his telescope out overnight, but he hadn't been stargazing that week. Said he was working night shifts. I didn't tell him what I saw. That whole week, the sky felt different to me. I still looked up, out of habit, but I didn't take the binoculars out again for a while. There was this weird silence to the nights that hadn't been there before. No owls, no crickets, I tried to convince myself it was just the season changing, but it didn't feel like that. I haven't seen anything like it since. But every once in a while, on really clear nights, I catch myself staring at the same part of the sky, waiting. I was driving back home late one Friday night on Route 67, a two-lane stretch of highway that cuts through the outskirts of town and then runs alongside a patch of woods before it hits the freeway. It's not a busy road, especially that late. Maybe 2 or 3 cars passed me the entire hour I was on it. The weather was clear but cold. Late October, early fall, chill in the air. I had my old border collie Rosie in the passenger seat, her head resting on the console. She wasn't barking or anything, just the usual quiet company on these drives. Around 11:15 p.m., just as I was passing the billboard near Mill Creek Road, I noticed it flicker. It wasn't the usual kind of flicker you get with old electrical stuff, though. The billboard, which normally advertised local businesses or upcoming events, suddenly blinked out completely for a second and then flashed back on with this strange pattern of lights. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it was a symmetrical design, like a kaleidoscope made of white and blue dots, arranged in shapes that looked almost like a snowflake or some kind of geometric symbol. It was glowing, but not like a normal neon or LED sign. The light seemed softer and more organic, for lack of a better word. The odd thing was, every time I tried to look directly at the pattern, it would vanish. Not just fade, but like it was erased or switched off. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me. But every time I glanced off center, there it was again, perfectly bright and clear. The flicker repeated for maybe 20 seconds, blinking on and off in short bursts, the pattern shifting slightly but staying symmetrical. I slowed down and pulled over onto the shoulder, just out of curiosity. Rosie sat up and stared out the window, ears perked. I stepped out with my phone, trying to get a picture, but every time I raised the camera and looked through the screen, the pattern disappeared. No matter how I tried, front camera, back camera, even the flashlight on, nothing showed up. It was like the billboard was playing some kind of trick. I leaned against my car and stared up at it. When I looked just beside the sign, the shapes came back, pulsing gently. The light had a weird depth to it, not just flat. It felt like it was hovering or floating just a few inches off the billboard surface, but I couldn't figure out how. Then the whole billboard went dark for maybe 10 seconds, and when it switched back on, it showed a normal ad again. A coffee shop promo with a smiling guy holding a latte. Nothing strange at all, just the regular kind of stuff you expect from a highway sign. I got back in the car and thought maybe I was tired or imagining things. Rosie nudged my hand with her nose. She looked calm but alert. A few minutes later, when I was about a mile down the road, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. There was a second billboard coming up on the left side, one I'd never really noticed before. This one had been dark the entire time I was driving. But now it flickered once, very briefly, showing the same kind of symmetrical pattern I saw on the first sign. It was the same pale blue and white glow, but this time the shapes looked a little different, more like interlocking triangles than snowflakes. Again, every time I turned my head to look directly at it, it vanished. I slowed down again, but this time I didn't pull over. It was like the pattern was only meant to be seen out of the corner of your eye. That unsettled me a bit. I don't know why exactly, but it felt like someone or something was trying to get my attention without actually letting me focus on it, like a secret message I wasn't supposed to catch. I kept driving. The roads were mostly empty, and the only other sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. Rosie stayed quiet, occasionally glancing toward the windows. About 10 minutes later, I passed a third billboard, the one just before the freeway entrance. It didn't flicker or flash like the others, but as I glanced up at it, something weird happened with the streetlights along the highway. They dimmed all at once for maybe 5 seconds. The whole stretch of road went slightly darker, and for a moment, the only light came from the billboard itself. That light was just a plain, bright white glow, no patterns this time. Then the streetlights flickered back on like nothing had happened. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, checking my rearview mirror. Nothing behind me except the usual sparse traffic. I pulled onto the freeway on-ramp and started heading toward town. The weirdness didn't stop, though. On the freeway, the radio went static for a solid minute, cutting out every station I tried, even the ones that usually come in clear. Then, suddenly, the static cleared, and the stations came back as if nothing happened. Rosie whined softly, which she never does on car rides unless she's restless or nervous. I reached over and petted her head, trying to shake off the weird feeling creeping over me. By the time I got home, about 30 minutes later, everything looked normal again. The neighborhood was quiet. The porch light was on like always. I got out and took Rosie inside. She immediately went to her bed and lay down. I checked the photos on my phone. Nothing but dark, blurry shots of the highway and some streetlights. No patterns, no strange flickers. Later that night, I tried to sleep but kept thinking about those billboards. I wondered if I imagined the patterns or if it was some glitch with the electricity in the area. But the fact that it happened 3 times on 3 different signs, plus the weird blackout of the streetlights and the radio static, made me doubt that. I even checked the local news and utility reports the next day. Nothing about outages or power fluctuations. No reports of strange lights or phenomena anywhere near Route 67. Over the next week, I drove that same route a few times at night, watching closely. None of the billboards flickered again, and the streetlights stayed steady. Rosie never seemed nervous again either. Still, every time I'm on that road late at night, I can't help but glance at those billboards out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes, I swear I catch a glimpse of those same symmetrical shapes faintly glowing, but then they're gone the second I look straight. I don't know what it was. I don't know why it happened, and I don't know if I want to find out. I didn't expect to come back to my campsite and find everything arranged like some kind of weird ritual. I'd been out on the Pine Ridge Trail, a stretch of woods a couple hours east of Asheville. It was early September and the weather was cool but clear, dry enough for a good fire the night before. I was solo hiking and camping, which I usually prefer, except this time something didn't sit right. I'd left camp around 9 a.m. that morning, planning to hike a few miles further to the overlook and back by afternoon. Rosie, my golden retriever mix, stayed with me the whole time, except I'd tethered her to a tree while I went down a rocky slope to check out a small stream. That was around 11:30. When I got back, the campsite was off. I swear it was exactly as I'd left it, except it wasn't. All my stuff was moved, and it was arranged perfectly in a circle, like someone had taken their time placing every item down. My backpack, tent poles, shoes, even the little stove, and fuel canister. Rosie was loose, standing right in the middle of the circle, looking at me like she didn't understand what was going on. I had no idea how long it'd been like that, but the grass beneath the circle had these faint scorch marks. Nothing heavy or burned through, just kind of darkened and brittle, like a campfire that barely caught. But there was no ash, no smell of smoke, just those faint rings pressed into the dirt. At first, I thought maybe some other campers had come through while I was gone, but no one else was around, and there was no sign anyone had been near. No footprints, no trash, no evidence of people at all except this arrangement. I started gathering my stuff back together, but it felt wrong. Every time I moved an item, Rosie growled low and kept staring into the trees around us. I checked the woods all around the site. No signs of anyone. That's when the quiet started feeling strange. Usually this part of the trail is full of bird song or the rustle of small animals, especially in the morning. But the woods were dead silent. No wind, no bugs, no birds, nothing. Just the occasional snap of a twig, but only when I moved. I packed up as fast as I could, Rosie never leaving my side. The whole time, I had this sense that something was watching me, just beyond the tree line, maybe 30 or 40 yards away. But every time I glanced over, there was nothing. The hike back was tense. The silence followed me the whole way. No birds, no squirrels, nothing usual for a forest. Rosie stayed close, ears pricked, muscles tense. When I reached the trailhead parking lot, I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was nearly 3 p.m. I'd been gone maybe 4 hours total, but it felt like more, like time was off somehow. The strangest part came when I got home that evening. I unpacked my backpack, and among the gear was a small patch of scorched grass stuck to the bottom of my water bottle case. It was dry, brittle, and smelled faintly of something burnt, but I couldn't figure out where it came from. It wasn't part of the campsite dirt, and I didn't recall picking it up anywhere else. Rosie seemed tired and uneasy all night, pacing between the living room and the bedroom, her eyes wide, watching corners and shadows I couldn't see. The next day, I went back to the site with a friend, Tom, who hikes the area a lot. I wanted to see if anything else had changed. We found the spot where my camp had been, and sure enough, the faint scorch marks were still in the grass. Tom looked closer and said the pattern was weird, like a rough circle with tiny arcs radiating out from it, almost like a symbol. He said it looked deliberate, but didn't recognize it from any camping or survival signs. Neither did I. We took some photos, but on my phone, the marks didn't show clearly. On his phone, the pictures were just blurry, with patches of light that flickered in and out when you looked at them. We agreed to keep it to ourselves, didn't want to sound crazy. Since then, I've kept Rosie close, and every time I'm in the woods now, I feel like I'm being watched. Not by animals, but something else. I don't know what exactly happened that morning, who or what moved my gear, or why it was laid out that way. It doesn't feel like any normal camping prank or mistake. It just feels wrong. I was doing a routine patrol near the southern boundary of Cedar Ridge Park just before dusk. It was late April, the air still holding a cool dampness from an earlier rain, and the trail was muddy enough to leave clear prints. I'd been with the Park Service for a few years by then, and I was used to weird stuff. Broken branches, odd sounds, the usual evidence of animals or careless visitors. But that night, I found something I still can't explain. I was hiking the Ridge Trail, heading back toward the ranger station after checking the old fire lookout tower. My dog, Luna, was with me. She's a German Shepherd mix, mostly calm but alert, and she kept sniffing around, poking through wet leaves and sniffing at logs like usual. We'd been out for maybe 2 hours, and the fading light was starting to make the woods feel colder than it should for April. About halfway down the slope, the trail dipped near a small muddy clearing by the creek. That's when I saw the prints. They were huge. Too big to be from any animal I'd ever seen in the park, and definitely not human. I stopped, knelt down, and looked closely. The tracks were circular, like perfect rings pressed into the mud. Each one was maybe 1.5 feet across, and they formed concentric circles, like ripples in water, only they were carved into the ground. The pattern was consistent for about 6 steps, then vanished near a clump of bushes. There was no drag mark, no sign of a foot or paw lifting. Just those perfect round impressions. The spacing between the prints was too long for a person or deer walking. Luna growled softly beside me and stared into the bushes, ears pricked. She didn't move forward, just stayed frozen, watching. I pulled out my flashlight and scanned the underbrush, but the woods looked normal. No branches broken, no other footprints, nothing that suggested what made the prints. It felt like something had just hovered above the mud and pressed down in a pattern. I checked the surrounding area for clues. No tire tracks, no boot prints, no animal tracks intersecting or nearby. The mud was soft enough to catch everything, but these were the only prints. I tried to shake off the weird feeling and figured maybe it was some prank, local kids messing around, using some kind of stencil or mold. But why 6 perfect, evenly spaced circles and then nothing? I called it in over the radio to the station. The dispatcher told me to collect photos and samples if I could. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, making sure to get the size by placing my glove beside a print. Luna stayed close, clearly unsettled. We stayed by the clearing for another 20 minutes. That's when I noticed something else. The forest around us felt quieter than normal. No birds, no frogs, no crickets. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful but tense, like the woods were holding their breath. Then I heard a faint sound, not like wind, more like a low hum or vibration coming from the direction of the prints. It wasn't steady, it pulsed slowly, almost rhythmic. I looked around, trying to figure out if it was machinery or power lines nearby, but there was nothing but forest in the creek. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination or something natural, but Luna's hackles were up again, and she was growling softly at the same spot. I didn't want to push it, so I grabbed her leash and started back toward the trail. On the way out, I glanced over my shoulder a few times. The prints stayed exactly where they were, undisturbed by wind or rain. And that humming sound seemed to fade with distance, but never fully disappeared until we got to the station. Later that night, after I'd filed the report and was about to turn in, I looked at the photos again. The edges of the prints looked too precise, like they'd been made by a perfect mold or machine, not a foot or paw. But if that was true, why no one was around? No vehicle tracks, no tools left behind. I asked some of the other rangers if they'd seen anything like it before. Most said no, though one older guy mentioned a story about strange lights people reported decades ago near the park. But no official reports ever came through. Over the next few days, I checked the clearing several times. No new prints, no signs of people or animals. The ground slowly dried and the prints faded, but the mystery stayed with me. Sometimes at night, when I'm alone in the station, I swear I can hear that same faint hum, the one I heard by the prints. Just barely there, like something waiting out in the dark woods beyond the trees. Luna never reacts to it anymore, but I still notice her ears twitch. I don't know what made those tracks, or why it left no trace beyond those perfect circles in the mud. The whole thing felt like a quiet reminder that there are things out there I just don't understand. I was driving home from work one Tuesday evening. It was late April, and the sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a dull purple gray. The highway was mostly empty except for a few cars scattered in the distance. I was about halfway through the tunnel that runs beneath the old river bend, a stretch about 2 miles long, pretty standard, except it always felt a little eerie, like the kind of place where something out of place would show up. I had my phone plugged in and was streaming a podcast, the one I usually listen to during my commute, but the signal was spotty in the tunnel, so it kept cutting in and out. I wasn't paying much attention until I glanced down and noticed my phone's voice memo app had somehow turned on and was recording. I don't remember starting it. The screen was dim, and the recording timer showed about 20 seconds. Curious, I stopped the recording as soon as I got out of the tunnel. When I played it back, it wasn't just silence or static like I'd expect. Instead, there was a low mechanical humming, steady but faint, like some machine running far off in the distance. Underneath that, there was a rhythmic tapping, almost like footsteps, but not quite, too regular and deliberate to be random noise. I rewound it several times, the sounds getting under my skin a bit. I couldn't place what it was or where it was coming from. The car was quiet, otherwise. No engine noises louder than usual. No other cars close by. At first, I figured maybe it was just interference from the tunnel itself or some strange echo bouncing around the walls, but the tapping was too consistent for that. It was like something was tapping on a metal surface, slow and rhythmic. But I couldn't tell if it was coming from inside the tunnel or somewhere else entirely. After I got home, I listened to the clip again. I didn't want to think about it too much, but the sound was different from anything I'd ever heard on that stretch of road. I checked the phone's settings, no apps running in the background, no reason for the voice memo to turn on by itself. That's when I noticed the timestamp on the file, exactly when I'd been inside the tunnel. Over the next few days, I kept checking my phone's recordings, but nothing else like that happened. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there with me in the tunnel, just out of sight. One night, I took the same route again, this time without any distractions, just focusing on the drive. As I entered the tunnel, I noticed a faint glow up ahead, nothing like the usual tunnel lights, which were pale and flickering, but a soft bluish shimmer, like light filtered through fog. It wasn't bright, but it definitely wasn't part of the normal lighting. I blinked, and it was gone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked in the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of something, maybe a shadow, moving along the wall. It was quick, almost like a trick of light, but I was sure I saw it. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks in the dim tunnel, but I felt uneasy the rest of the drive. The next day at work, I asked a coworker if they'd noticed anything strange on that stretch of highway. She laughed it off, but mentioned a couple of drivers had reported weird sounds near the tunnel, metallic noises, odd vibrations in their cars, that kind of thing. Later that week, I was driving through the tunnel again when the voice memo app turned on by itself once more. I didn't touch the phone. This time, the recording was longer, about a minute. When I played it back later, the humming was louder and the tapping had a kind of pattern, almost like Morse code, but garbled and faint. There was also something else, a soft, almost musical ringing underneath, like a distant bell or chime. I tried to make sense of it, but got nothing clear. My phone's battery had dropped faster than usual that day, too, and the GPS signal was wonky inside the tunnel. I started paying more attention on those drives. I noticed my headlights would flicker for a second as I entered the tunnel, and sometimes the dashboard lights dimmed, then came back. Once, the radio cut out completely, and instead of static, I heard a faint voice whispering, but it was too quiet to catch words. One evening, Luna, my dog, was with me in the car. She usually slept through the ride, but this time she was restless, whining and growling softly as we approached the tunnel entrance. I reached down to calm her, and she suddenly snapped her head toward the back seat, hackles raised. I checked behind me, but there was nothing, just the empty back seat and the window reflecting the fading light. As we drove through, Luna kept staring out the window, tense, as if something was there beside us. When I pulled into the driveway later, Luna bolted out of the car and disappeared into the house without looking back. That night, I looked at the latest recording from the tunnel. The sounds had gotten more complex. Layers of humming, tapping, and that soft ringing, but now there was something else. Faint, irregular clicking, almost like a code or signal. I'm not sure what to make of it. My phone hasn't recorded anything since, but I'm hesitant to drive through that tunnel after dark now. Something's there or was there that I can't explain. The quiet mechanical noises, the strange lights, Luna's reaction, it all feels connected. I don't know if anyone else ever really notices these things, or if they're just passing them off as glitches or imagination. All I know is that on those drives, especially in that tunnel, the world felt off, like there was something watching or waiting just beyond the edges of what I can see or hear. I set up my telescope and camera on the back porch around 11 p.m., hoping to catch some good shots of Jupiter and Saturn. I'd been into amateur astronomy for a few years, nothing fancy, just a solid reflector telescope and a DSLR with a zoom lens attached. My place is out in the country near Ellsworth, Maine, so the skies get pretty dark. Usually it's perfect for shooting stars, planets, whatever you want. This night it was clear and still, the kind of calm that makes you forget everything else for a while. I had my old golden retriever, Charlie, lying next to me on the porch. He's 10 now, so mostly just snoozing when I'm out stargazing. I was focused on a bright star called Vega. It was high and sharp tonight, the kind of light you could almost believe was watching back. I got my camera pointed, adjusted the lens, and started taking some long exposures. After a few minutes, I noticed something weird on the lens. At first, I thought it was dew, typical for this time of year. But it wasn't just a little moisture. The whole lens seemed to fog up like I had my breath on it or it was steaming. Except I hadn't touched it or moved the camera, and the air was cool, dry even. The fog got thicker over the next few minutes, so much that the star Vega disappeared completely. I was starting to get annoyed, rubbing the lens gently with my sleeve, trying to clear it, but it didn't budge. I put the camera down for a second and checked Charlie. He was alert now, ears perked, staring off into the woods behind the house. That's unusual for him. He's not one to fixate on nothing. I figured maybe a deer or raccoon was out there. I went back to the camera. The fog on the lens stayed thick for what felt like at least 5 minutes. No breeze, no change in temperature, just that creeping haze sitting on the glass. I checked the camera settings, everything normal. Then, without warning, the fog vanished. I blinked and looked through the viewfinder. Vega was back, but the star didn't look right. Instead of a sharp pinpoint, it had this strange shape, like a blurry flare stretched out sideways, but there was no other light source nearby that could cause lens flare. It was soft but definitely distorted, like a smudge, except it wasn't on the lens anymore. I tried adjusting focus, zooming in and out, but the shape stayed the same. Every other star around Vega looked normal, small points of light, no distortion. Just Vega was different. Curious, I switched to live view on the camera screen and zoomed in on the star. The shape looked even weirder, kind of like a crescent with a faint tail trailing off to one side. It reminded me of one of those weird light reflections you see on car windows sometimes, but there was nothing around that could reflect anything this way. I took a few pictures, hoping it was a camera glitch. The images saved fine, but when I zoomed in later on the laptop, the star was the same distorted shape. I tried to recreate the effect with the camera pointed at other bright stars on different nights, but nothing came close. Just that one night on that one star. While this was happening, Charlie kept growling low and quiet, his eyes fixed on the tree line again. I felt a little uneasy, but when I looked, there was nothing moving. No animals, no lights, no sounds except the faint rustling of leaves. After maybe 20 minutes, the strange shape started to fade. Vega slowly went back to its usual crisp dot in the sky, and the lens was completely clear. I packed everything up and took Charlie inside. He refused to settle for a while, pacing and whining, which he never does after being outside. I checked the photos again on my computer and stared at that weird star shape. I couldn't figure out what caused it. No camera apps I use have glitches like that. No weather reports mentioned anything unusual. No fog, no strange atmospheric disturbances. For the next few days, I kept checking the sky, the weather, and my equipment. Nothing repeated. The night sky looked normal, my camera worked fine, and Charlie acted like his usual lazy self. I'm still not sure what happened with that lens fog and that distorted star shape. I've shown the pictures to a few local astronomy friends. Some said maybe it was a weird atmospheric effect, maybe a reflection of a satellite or plane lights, but none of them could explain the lens fogging or the shape that didn't move or change like any lens flare or reflection should. Most nights since then, I've felt like something's watching me from the woods while I'm out there, just beyond the porch light. It's never close or obvious, just there. And sometimes when I look back at those photos, I think maybe I caught a glimpse of whatever it was, something not quite right, something that didn't belong. But in the end, it's just a star, a fogged up lens, and a restless dog. Nothing more, nothing less. The first time I noticed it was just after midnight, heading out for a smoke break from my office on the 15th floor of the Granite Tower downtown. The building's glass facade wraps around like a mirror, reflecting the whole block, the street lights, and the city's faint hum at night. I was standing near the windows on the east side, just trying to catch some fresh air and shake off the tension from a long day, when something caught my eye. It was a shape. Hard to describe. Not quite solid, but not transparent either. Like a shadow with edges too sharp to be just a trick of light, and yet somehow not completely there. It hovered in the reflection, just outside the building, maybe 50 feet from the street, behind the parking lot. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe a homeless guy or a late-night worker, but when I blinked and looked again, the shape didn't move, and it didn't seem human. It was tall and thin, but its outline was jagged, almost like a distorted triangle or some kind of cloak billowing in a wind that wasn't there. I pinched my eyes and looked back to the actual street. Nothing. No one. Just the usual empty lot with a few scattered trash cans and a flickering street lamp. I thought maybe I was tired, so I shrugged it off and went back inside. The next night, same time, same place, I caught it again. The shape was still there, in roughly the same spot. I called it out quietly to my coworker Jamie, who was at the next window smoking a cigarette too. "Hey, do you see that?" I asked, pointing at the glass. Jamie squinted, shaking her head. "See what?" "The shape. Over there." I nodded toward the reflection. Jamie leaned closer, but just saw the empty lot. "I don't see anything." I looked again, and sure enough, the shape was gone. It wasn't exactly scary at that point, just weird. I figured maybe it was some sort of weird light play or a bug on the glass. But it kept showing up every night, always in that same spot, not moving, never blinking or changing shape much. After a few nights, I tried to take a photo on my phone, but every time I raised the camera, the shape disappeared right before I could snap the shot. I swear I could see it 1 second, turn the phone, and it was gone, like it sensed the camera. I started timing my breaks carefully, watching the windows of the nearby buildings in the reflection. Nothing else ever showed up, just that one shape. It was mostly visible on clear nights, never when it was raining or foggy. One night, I stayed late after everyone left. The building was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioning and my own footsteps on the carpet. I watched the reflection for almost an hour. The shape remained steady, a faint, dark figure against the lighter glow of the city. At one point, it looked like it tilted its head, almost like it was watching me. I felt cold all of a sudden, which was odd because it was a warm night and the windows were closed. I thought about calling security or the front desk, but I wasn't sure what I'd say. That night, when I left the office, the shape was gone. The lot was still empty, and the street lamp was flickering worse than usual. I told a few other coworkers over the next week, trying to get them to come out for a look. Some humored me, but none saw it. One even joked I was losing it. The weirdest part was how the shape interacted with the environment in the reflection. One night, a car drove past the lot. The shape didn't move, but seemed to block the car's reflection for a split second, like it was there physically, even though the street was empty. One evening, I stayed past midnight again and brought my phone with me to record a video. I held it steady and aimed at the reflection. The shape appeared about halfway through, dark and motionless. But every time I looked at the playback later, the shape was just a blur, like a smudge of shadow that flickered and vanished. I started feeling on edge at work, like the shape was waiting for me or watching from the other side of the glass. I kept checking my phone for messages or calls, but found none, and no one else seemed to notice anything unusual. One night, a security guard named Lester caught me staring out the window for what had to be the 10th time in an hour. "You see something?" he asked, nodding at the glass. "Yeah, something," I said, swallowing hard. "There's this shape just out there, like a shadow, but it doesn't belong." Lester shrugged. "Maybe it's just a trick of the lights. This building can mess with your head sometimes." I wanted to agree, but I wasn't convinced. The next week, I started keeping a notebook to jot down what I saw each night. The shape was always there on clear nights, sometimes clearer, sometimes faint. It never moved, never changed, but once, I swear, it seemed to step forward in the reflection, as if inching closer. I checked with the building management about cameras outside. They said there were a few, but none aimed toward the parking lot, just entrances and walkways. One night, I brought my dog, a border collie mix named Juno, with me to the office's loading dock area outside after hours. I wanted to see if maybe the shape was actually outside the building. Juno was quiet, ears perked, staring at the same spot I always watched from inside. I shone a flashlight around the empty lot. Nothing but gravel and trash. No sign of anything, no footprints, no disturbed grass. But Juno kept growling low and backing away from the direction of the shape's usual spot. That was when I noticed a low humming sound, just below hearing range, vibrating through the air. It wasn't from the building or nearby traffic. It came and went, subtle but steady. I didn't stay long. I called Juno back and headed inside. After that night, I avoided the windows as much as I could. The shape kept showing, though. It never disappeared for long, always there, silent, watching from the glass. One late night, I left the office feeling exhausted. As I walked down the street, I glanced back at the building's facade. The shape was there again, but this time, it wasn't alone. There were faint outlines of two more shapes, smaller, hovering just behind the first. I stopped cold, heart thudding, but when I blinked, they vanished. I don't know what I saw, or if it was just some trick my mind played on me after too many late nights and long shifts, but every time I pass by that building now, I feel like I'm being watched through the glass by something that's there, but never quite there, and I can't explain it. It happened 2 years ago, mid-September, out near Bell Hollow in Nebraska. I used to live in Omaha, but after I hit 30, I moved out to the edge of nowhere, rented a small house on a couple acres of land just outside town. Still worked remote for the same logistics company, but the quiet helped me stay sane. I ran every day, sometimes just a few miles, sometimes a full 13 if my legs had it. I like to start late, less sun, less traffic, more time to think. The moon was high and bright that night, almost full. Cool air, dry ground, no wind. There's this stretch behind my house, a dirt road that cuts through old farmland. Most of it's flat fields, overgrown with weeds, some busted up fences, rusting irrigation rigs no one uses anymore. My usual loop took me down county line, around 2 old silos and back along a narrow path next to the creek. I brought my headlamp, but barely used it. Moonlight lit everything up just fine. About 3 miles in, I stopped to stretch near the break in the fence where the trail hits the open field. I remember I could hear the crickets, distant dogs, even a barn owl somewhere off to my left. I remember how clear the air smelled. I remember noticing how quiet it was, but not in a weird way. Just peaceful. I was jogging again, slow and steady, when I caught it. It moved left to right across the field, maybe 100 yards ahead, something long and narrow, like a dark ripple. At first I thought it was a deer or a coyote, but the way it moved didn't make sense. It didn't leap or bound or walk. It glided like it was skimming the surface of the grass. And fast, way too fast. It covered maybe 60 feet in a couple seconds and vanished behind a thicket of scrub brush near the far fence line. I stopped, pulled my earbuds out, nothing, no sound, no rustling, not even a single blade of grass bent in the direction it moved. I waited for maybe 10 seconds, squinting hard. My eyes were adjusted to the moonlight so I could see pretty far, but whatever it was didn't come out again. I told myself it was probably a bird or some weird optical thing, maybe a shadow from a plane overhead. I even looked up, half expecting to see blinking lights, but the sky was completely empty, just stars and the moon. I picked up my pace a little after that, not because I was scared exactly, more just keyed up, like something in my brain didn't want me standing still. I looped past the silos and came back around to the trail behind my place. That whole section follows the creek for maybe half a mile, and there's trees on both sides. Usually, it's peaceful. That night, I kept checking over my shoulder. I wasn't hearing anything. No branches breaking, no footsteps. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Right before I hit my driveway, I saw it again. Same shape, same motion. This time farther out, across the creek. It moved against the direction of the water, fast and smooth, like someone dragging a black tarp through the grass. Only the tarp had no edges and didn't make a sound. I stopped running and just stared at where it had gone. The hairs on my arms were standing up. I didn't feel cold, just suddenly aware of every noise, or lack of noise, around me. I walked the last stretch home and locked the door behind me, which I almost never did unless I left town. My dog, a scruffy mutt named Cray, was waiting inside like usual. He didn't bark, didn't pace, just stood at the door with his ears up, tail low. I crouched and scratched his neck, and he leaned into me like he wanted to hide behind me. The next night, I took the same route. Not because I was trying to prove something. I think part of me just didn't want to give in to whatever weirdness that had been. I left earlier than usual this time, a little before sunset. I told myself I wanted the extra light, but I think I just didn't want to be out there in full dark. The whole run was normal until I hit the field again. I paused at the same break in the fence. Nothing moved. No shadows. But Cray, who I'd brought with me that time, started whining and tugging at the leash. He's usually calm as anything, doesn't even bark at deer, but he wanted nothing to do with that field. He stopped walking entirely when we reached the edge, planting his feet and pulling toward the road. I knelt down and tried to soothe him, but he just kept staring into the middle of the field. His ears were down, his whole body stiff. He wouldn't stop staring. I looked too. I didn't see anything, but my skin prickled. Not like I was being watched, more like I was too visible. Like standing on a stage in front of an audience I couldn't see. I gave in and we turned around, ran the loop backward. Cray relaxed as soon as we were back under trees. A few days later, I mentioned it to Evan, my neighbor across the road. He's ex-Navy, pretty rational guy, spends most of his time fishing or rebuilding old motors. I just asked if he'd ever seen anything weird out by the old McCall field. He shrugged and said, "Couple nights last year, I saw lights hovering over that ridge. Figured it was a drone or some weather thing." I asked what kind of lights. He said, "White, didn't blink. Just sat there, silent." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. That same night, around 11, I took Cray out back for a pee. There's no streetlights out there, so everything was dark except for the porch light and the moon. He sniffed around like usual. I leaned on the railing, watching the tree line. Then he stopped and growled, low and quiet, not at anything specific, just facing the direction of the field again. I scanned the horizon. Still nothing, but I remember this tight feeling in my gut, like being pulled forward, almost like vertigo, but horizontal. I went cold all over, and for no reason I could name, I reached down and picked Cray up. He's not a small dog, but I carried him inside and shut the door behind us. That was the last time I ran that path at night. I kept to the road after that, or went out in the mornings instead. I didn't see the shape again, but sometimes on very clear nights, I'd get that same weird feeling, like being too exposed, like something knew where I was. I never saw it up close. I never heard a sound. But every time I think about how fast it moved, how it didn't displace the grass or make wind or even spook the birds, I feel wrong. Like something broke a rule I didn't know existed. And I still don't know what it was. I was out on Lake Winfield fishing late one Saturday night, like I did most weekends. I usually liked it because the water was quiet and the stars were out, and the only light came from my little boat lantern and the occasional flicker of fireflies along the shore. The wind was calm, the air a little chilly, but not enough to make me uncomfortable. I had my dog, Benny, curled up at my feet. He's a border collie mix, always calm on the water unless a fish splashes close. Like around midnight, I was sitting back, reeling in a line when something caught my eye. I noticed a cluster of pale lights hovering just above the lake's surface, maybe 20 or 30 feet away from the boat. They were kind of soft and diffuse, not like any boat lights or lanterns I'd ever seen, and they didn't reflect on the water. That's the first thing that really threw me off. Normally, any light close to the water would reflect, right? These didn't. It was like the lake just swallowed the reflections whole. The lights didn't move with the wind either. The water was barely rippling, and the breeze was steady, but those lights just stayed put in the exact same spot. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me, or it was some kind of optical illusion. Benny stirred a little, lifting his head and growling softly at the lights, which was weird because he's usually pretty chill unless there's a bird or a raccoon nearby. I called out to the lights, half joking, "Hey, you folks lost or something?" No answer, of course. They just stayed there, steady and unblinking. The color was a pale blue-white, kind of eerie but not harsh, like glow sticks left out too long or maybe some weird bioluminescent bug, but way too big and steady for that. I thought about paddling closer to check them out, but something about those lights felt off. Not threatening exactly, just wrong in a way I couldn't explain, like they were watching but didn't want to be found. I grabbed my phone to take a video, but it was dead, battery drained. I hadn't used it much that day, so that didn't make sense either. I figured no big deal. I'd get a better look tomorrow during the day. Maybe the lights were some kind of strange reflection or some prank. Still, Benny was tense, eyes locked on the lights. After a few minutes, I noticed something else. The water around the lights wasn't quite right. Normally, even on a still night, you'd see the faintest ripple from something hovering that close to the surface. But this part of the lake was dead calm, like the water was being held still under those lights, almost like a silent bubble. I thought I might be imagining things, so I started talking to Benny to distract myself. "Maybe it's some weird fishing buoys or those flares that float, huh?" But no buoys make lights that steady or pale, and I knew flares would drift with the wind. Then after maybe 10 or 15 minutes, the lights suddenly dimmed, like someone was turning down a dimmer switch slowly. They didn't blink out suddenly or shoot away. They just faded until they disappeared completely. The lake was just dark again. Benny relaxed and lay back down. I sat there for a long time, staring at the spot where the lights had been, feeling cold, even though the air was mild. On the ride back to the dock, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the lights again, but nothing showed up. The rest of the night was normal. Quiet, dark, with only the usual night sounds of water lapping and frogs calling. The next day, I talked to some of the other fishermen around town. Nobody mentioned seeing anything like that. No strange lights or unusual calm patches on the lake. I tried to check my phone's battery history to see if there was an explanation for it dying so suddenly, but everything looked normal, like it should have had at least 30% left. Since then, I haven't been back out at night on the lake alone. Benny and I still go during the day, but that spot where the lights hovered, I avoid it. The whole thing doesn't make much sense to me, and that's what messes with me the most. Something was there that night, just out of reach, quiet and still like a secret. I'm not sure if it was natural or something else, but it wasn't any fishing light or boat I've ever seen. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but Benny's still wary around that part of the lake. He doesn't like being near the water's edge after dark, and he's never been like that before. That's all I really know. The night was quiet, too quiet, really, for the kind of job I had at the Ridgeview weather station. I was the night tech, basically just me, a few computers, and a bunch of instruments on this remote hilltop overlooking the Shenandoah Valley. The station was about as isolated as you could get without being in the middle of nowhere, maybe 2 miles from the nearest road, surrounded by forest and fields that stretched down toward the town of Madison. I'd worked the night shift here for 6 months, and mostly it was just me staring at radar screens and checking data logs, recording whatever weird weather passed through. I liked the solitude, honestly. My dog Tucker, a black lab with a white patch on his chest, came with me on these shifts, mostly because my apartment at home wasn't dog-friendly. Tucker was curled up on the floor next to the control desk that night, snoring softly, when the instruments suddenly started acting up. I was watching the usual readings, wind speed, humidity, atmospheric pressure, when my monitor flickered. Then a high-pitched buzzing sound filled the room for a second before cutting out. The electromagnetic sensor was showing a sharp spike, one of those massive jumps you'd expect with a thunderstorm or solar flare. The thing was, the sky outside was perfectly clear. No clouds anywhere, no wind, not even a stray leaf moving in the trees beyond the window. Tucker perked up, ears twitching, but didn't bark. I got up and looked out. The moon was full and bright, lighting up the trees and the empty field behind the station like daytime. No lightning, no planes, no satellites overhead, nothing to explain the spike. I checked the instruments again. Still the same jump in EM activity, like something had surged through the atmosphere, but I couldn't see or hear anything unusual. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe it was a glitch in the equipment. These old sensors sometimes gave false alarms, especially when the temperature dropped at night. But then the weirdness started layering on. About 10 minutes after the spike, Tucker suddenly stood up and started growling low and steady, staring out the big window that faced the forest line. I followed his gaze but saw nothing. No animals, no movement. Just black trees and moonlight. I told him to calm down, but he wouldn't stop. He kept growling, hackles raised, teeth bared, not aggressive exactly, more like alert, warning me something was off. I moved closer, resting my hand on his back, but the feeling of unease was already creeping into my chest. Then the lights in the control room dimmed briefly, like someone flipped a switch for a second. The computers didn't reboot or lose power, but the monitors flickered again. I swear I heard a faint hum in the air, almost like static, but it wasn't coming from the machines. It was too low, too steady. I pulled up the security cameras on the screens, one pointed at the station's perimeter, the other scanning the edge of the woods about 100 yards away. Both showed nothing unusual. No vehicles, no people, no animals. I walked outside with a flashlight and Tucker tagging along, still tense but quieter now. The air was cold and crisp, and the stars stretched clear above. I scanned the tree line carefully, shining the beam through the branches. Nothing moved. No strange lights or shapes. No noise except the wind rustling leaves far off. I stayed out there for about 10 minutes, turning slowly in a circle, eyes peeled for anything out of place. When I went back inside, the spike on the EM sensor was gone, but a low-level hum lingered in the background, almost like a vibration you could feel in your bones. I tried calling my supervisor in Madison, but the radio link was crackling with static and eventually cut out. I switched to my cell phone. No signal. The station sat on a ridge between hills and dense forest. The cell tower was miles away, so I wasn't surprised. Still, it made me feel more isolated than usual. I kept an eye on the data feed. Nothing else abnormal happened for the rest of my shift, but the feeling didn't leave me. Tucker wouldn't settle down, pacing the floor and occasionally growling softly at the window. Every so often, the lights dimmed a little or flickered, like the building itself was breathing. When the sun started to rise, I was relieved. I packed up my gear and hooked Tucker's leash to the station door. On the way down the dirt path to the truck, I looked back once more at the weather station. The instruments were quiet now. The forest behind it seemed normal in the morning light. But as I was driving home, I glanced up at the sky and caught something moving in the corner of my eye. A faint glow, drifting silently just above the treetops. It wasn't like a plane or helicopter. It moved too smoothly without sound or blinking lights. I blinked, and it was gone. When I got home, I let Tucker out into the backyard. He seemed tired but okay, like he had no idea what he'd been barking about all night. I sat on the porch for a while, watching the early morning sky, wondering what the hell had happened up on that hill. I still don't know. The instruments caught something real enough to disrupt the sensors and mess with the power, but nothing that anyone could see. No obvious source, no explanation. Tucker hasn't acted strange since. Neither have I, really. Just this quiet, unsettled feeling that maybe whatever it was is still out there, somewhere beyond the trees, waiting or watching. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear that low hum again, just faint enough to make the silence feel wrong. It was one of those evenings in early October where the air feels sharp but not cold, and the sky's clear enough that you can see all the stars starting to poke through. I was out on my bike, just a usual solo ride on a quiet country road near where I live in western Pennsylvania. Nothing fancy, just trying to clear my head after a long day at work. The road I take is mostly straight, maybe a few bends here and there, lined with thick woods on either side. The trees were just starting to lose their leaves, so there was a little rustling from the breeze, but not much else. I had my earbuds out because I like to hear the wind and the tires on the pavement, but I wasn't blasting music or anything. Just enough volume to keep the silence from getting too loud. I was about 3 miles in, going steady, when I noticed something weird out of the corner of my eye. A shadow just beyond the tree line, maybe 20 or 30 feet off the road. At first I thought it might be an animal, maybe a deer or something, but it didn't act right. It stayed just at the edge, always matching my pace, like it was keeping up with me but not stepping into the road or making a noise. I slowed down a little, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me. That's when I realized the shadow wasn't a deer or any animal I'd ever seen. It was tall and lanky, but there were no clear features by it, just this dark shape that shifted subtly with the movement of the trees. It wasn't running or walking, more like it glided or floated along, perfectly in sync with my speed. I tried to look directly at it a few times, but every time I did, it kind of blended back into the trees or disappeared behind branches. The sun was low, so the shadows were long, and maybe it was just some trick of light, but my gut said otherwise. It felt deliberate. I checked behind me a couple times to Lide, but there was no sign of anyone else on the road or any car. Just me, the fading light, and that thing in the woods. I thought about turning around, but the road was narrow, and I didn't want to stop completely. I kept pedaling, but slower now, trying to see if it would do something else. Then the weird part started. The shadow didn't just stay next to me anymore, it started to mimic my exact movements. If I sped up, it sped up. If I slowed, it slowed. When I veered a bit to the left, it moved with me, always just on the edge of the tree line. I felt my heart speed up, but I told myself it was probably some kind of animal or even a person hiding, though that made less sense the more I thought about it. Who would follow someone silently, just matching their pace, never stepping into view? I looked at the trees closely. No movement besides the shadow, no sound except the wind in my tires. I even called out once, just, "Hey, who's there?" But no reply. The shadow stayed where it was. About a mile later, the road started to open up into farmland. The trees thinned out, and the shadow stayed behind the last line of woods. I slowed to a stop, breathing hard, and glanced back one last time. Nothing. No sign of it. I kept going toward home, still shaken, but trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. When I got back to my place, I told my roommate Sarah about it. She shrugged and said, maybe it was a trick of the light or some deer in the brush. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing that shadow, how it moved perfectly with me. I even wondered if I'd lost some time or if it had been following me for longer than I thought. The next day, I went back to the same stretch of road during daylight. I looked for footprints or anything out of place near the tree line where the shadow had been. There was nothing. No prints, no signs of a person or animal, just the usual leaves and dirt. I told a few friends, but no one had any explanation. Some joked it was a ghost or a government experiment, but none of that sat right with me. It didn't feel like anything paranormal or sci-fi, just something that didn't belong, moving alongside me in silence. A couple of nights later, I tried riding the same road again, hoping maybe I'd see it again or figure out what it was. But nothing showed up. No shadow, no strange feeling. I still think about it sometimes. I'm not sure if it was some kind of animal with crazy camouflage or something else. It never tried to hurt me or come closer, just watched and followed. I haven't told many people because it sounds crazy, but it happened and I can't explain it. The shadow on the edge of the woods, keeping pace with me like it was part of the road itself. I was 16, just some kid messing around with my phone on the 4th of July. We lived in a small town in central Ohio, nothing fancy, just wide streets, a few parks, and a lot of open sky. That night was warm, humid, typical summer stuff. I was outside with my little sister, June, and our dog, a scruffy mutt named Huckleberry. June was watching the fireworks from the porch swing while I was trying to get a good video of them with my phone. I didn't really expect anything special, just the usual pops and colors. I remember the sky was mostly clear, a few thin clouds drifting by. The fireworks were going off, one after another, and I was holding my phone up, recording. I wasn't even paying that much attention because, honestly, fireworks get old after a while, right? But then, in the middle of one of the bigger bursts, I caught something weird in the frame. A small, bright orb, like a glowing dot, moving fast across the sky behind the fireworks. At first, I thought it was just a plane or maybe a drone, but it moved way too quickly and too sharply. I mean, it wasn't like a smooth arc or anything. It zipped along, then suddenly changed direction at these crazy sharp angles, like 90 degrees or more. It didn't just curve, it snapped left, then straight up, then diagonally down again. It was almost like it was darting around, but no blinking lights like a plane or a drone. Just this solid, bright, white orb. I froze for a second, staring at my phone screen because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Huckleberry started barking at something, looking up too, all tense. June noticed it too and got off the swing, shading her eyes to see better. But the orb wasn't making any sound at all. No drone buzz, no engines, nothing. Just this silent ball of light weaving through the clouds. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished, like it zipped up into the clouds and was gone. No fading out, no blinking, just nothing. The clouds were thick enough to cover it, but I swear it moved in a way no normal aircraft could. I stopped recording after that because I was kind of freaked out. We talked about it afterward, June and I, trying to figure out if we both saw the same thing. She said it looked like a firefly, but way too big and way too fast. Huckleberry stayed on alert, sniffing the air and growling low for a while. After a few minutes, he calmed down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next day, I showed the video to my friend Carter. He's into all that weird stuff, conspiracy theories, UFO videos, you name it. He slowed the video down and zoomed in, and yeah, the orb was definitely there. No flickering, no blinking navigation lights, just this glowing sphere moving impossible angles across the sky. Carter said it looked like nothing he'd ever seen from a drone or plane. That's when things got stranger. The night after the fireworks, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, but I kept hearing these weird clicking sounds outside, like a quiet mechanical tapping or rhythm coming from the woods behind our house. It wasn't normal animal noises, and it definitely wasn't human. I grabbed my flashlight and looked outside, but there was nothing there. The woods were just shadows and quiet except for that clicking. The next couple of nights, the clicking came again, always around the same time, just after midnight. I asked my parents if they heard it, but they said no. June said she noticed a strange light near the tree line one night, just a faint glow, nothing like the orb from before. She thought maybe it was a neighbor with a flashlight. I wasn't so sure. I went out a few times with Huckleberry trying to catch whatever it was making those noises, but we never found anything. The woods felt wrong, like there was something watching but not close enough to see. Then one afternoon, I was walking home from school and noticed something odd on the sidewalk near our street. These tiny, perfectly round patches where the grass was dead. Like little circles, maybe 3 inches wide, buffed spaced out randomly across the front lawns of about 4 houses. I checked, and they didn't look like burn marks or chemicals, just dead spots. No one seemed to notice or care. I tried to take a picture, but when I looked at the photo later, the spots were blurry and sort of glowing faintly, like a soft white haze over them. When I showed the picture to June, she said, "That's creepy," and then changed the subject. I couldn't explain any of it. The orb, the clicking, the dead patches. It was like something invisible was poking around our neighborhood. One night a few days later, I was lying in bed and noticed the power flicker. The lights dimmed for a few seconds, then came back on. I got up to check the circuit breaker, but everything looked normal. Then I heard it, a low hum outside, almost like an electrical hum, but deeper and vibrating through the ground. I peeked out my window and saw a faint glow in the sky behind the trees. It wasn't the orb from before, but a wider, pulsing light, almost like it was breathing. I blinked, and it was gone. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing those clicks again, this time closer, almost like something tapping on the side of the house. I told my parents about it the next morning, but they just shrugged it off, said it was probably a woodpecker or branches hitting the house in the wind. I wasn't convinced. The woods behind us were dense and quiet. I'd been there plenty of times. I never saw a woodpecker that close, and the tapping was too steady and mechanical. The strangest thing happened a week after the fireworks. Our whole neighborhood had power flickers all at once. Lights dimming for exactly 17 seconds, then back to normal. It wasn't just us either. I found out later that every house's porch camera froze during that blackout for exactly 17 seconds. Someone online posted a clip from one of the cameras, and on every single one there was the same bright dot in the sky. Not moving, just hanging there in the exact same spot. That was weird because, as far as I know, there's no star or satellite that stays fixed like that. It didn't blink or move. When the cameras came back on, the dot was gone. I kept thinking about that orb from the fireworks. Could it have been the same thing? Or something related? After that blackout, the clicking stopped. The dead grass patches didn't get any bigger or multiply, and the strange glowing in the woods vanished. But every now and then, when I'm outside at night, I get this feeling, like something's watching from just beyond the trees, like it's waiting. I still watch the sky when it's clear, hoping to catch that orb again or anything like it. I'm not sure what it was or if anyone else saw it, but it stuck with me. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there somewhere, just hiding in plain sight. It started with the power cutting out. Just a quick blackout, nothing unusual for late summer storms in Cedar Ridge, the neighborhood where I live. But what came after was anything but normal. I was sitting on my porch around 9:15 p.m., just drinking a beer and watching my dog, a wiry little terrier named Sprocket, chase moths in the porch light. We'd had a thunderstorm roll through earlier, so the air was thick and humid, with the smell of wet grass and ozone hanging around. Then, without warning, all the lights flickered and went dead. The whole block went dark at once. The street lamps, porch lights, everything. I figured it was just the storm messing with the grid again. I pulled out my phone to check if anyone else had posted about it, but my screen went black too. No service. Then, something weird happened. About 17 seconds later, the power snapped back on. But I noticed the porch cameras, the little motion-activated security cams all around the neighborhood. Their feeds were frozen. Every single one of them. Like the exact same moment was paused on every camera across the block. I'm not into conspiracy stuff, but that was the first thing that felt off. How could the cameras all freeze at the same time? Then they all unfroze exactly 17 seconds later. I realized this because I was watching a live feed on my phone from my buddy Jenna's porch cam. She's a tech nerd, has a dozen cameras around her house, and it suddenly started playing again, showing this bright white dot hanging in the sky, right above the old church steeple on Main Street. I grabbed my binoculars from inside, the cheap pair I use for hiking, and looked up. The dot didn't move. It was just there, hovering. I blinked, and for a second, the dot seemed to shimmer, like the heat haze you see above asphalt in the summer. But this was the middle of the night. It didn't change position or size. It just stayed perfectly still, reflecting the streetlights and stars around it, but wrong. Like a funhouse mirror reflection that didn't quite match the sky behind it. I called Jenna. She picked up on the second ring, sounding confused. Did you see that? All the cams froze for like 17 seconds, then came back with that dot right there. I'm watching it. Yeah, she said, voice low. Same here. Every cam around here showed the same thing, same spot. I don't know why we both thought to check the cameras, just some neighborhood habit, but it was strange how synced everything was. I asked her if she was going outside. She said she was too spooked. I stepped off the porch. Sprocket followed, nose twitching, ears back like he was picking up on something. The night was silent, except for the distant hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street, oddly late for that time. The dot stayed right where it was. I walked toward the church, keeping my eyes locked on it. The sky was cloudy, but the clouds weren't moving, almost like time slowed. I swear the air felt heavier, thicker somehow. Sprocket kept glancing up, but wouldn't bark or growl. I pulled out my phone again to try and take a picture, but the camera just kept focusing and refocusing, never locking in. The dot shimmered more then, flickering on the edge of visibility. A car drove past and its headlights flashed on the dot for a second. The way the light bounced off it wasn't normal, like it wasn't reflecting the way something solid would, more like a thin sheet of oil on water, moving and rippling in ways that didn't line up with the car's motion. Then I noticed my neighbor, Mrs. Lark, standing in her front yard. She was staring up at the dot too, frozen in place, her mouth slightly open like she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. I waved at her and she blinked, then looked down like she suddenly snapped out of it. We didn't say anything to each other. The weirdness was heavy in the air, and I think we both felt it was better to just watch and wait. After a few minutes, the dot slowly started to fade. Not like it flew away or anything. Like it just got dimmer, like a star disappearing behind clouds, but the clouds were still clear. And then it was gone. I looked around. The street was back to normal. The porch lights buzzed. The street lamps glowed yellow. Sprocket stopped staring up and started sniffing the grass again like nothing had happened. That's when I noticed the time on my phone, or at least what the screen said. It was 9:49 p.m., except I had been watching the dot for almost 30 minutes. Something about the timing didn't add up. I was certain I'd been outside maybe 15 minutes tops, but the clock had jumped almost 20 minutes while I was looking at that thing. I don't know how that happened. My phone didn't reboot or anything, and the other clocks around the house still matched. I texted Jenna again, asking her what time it was there. She said 9:50. We both agreed the clocks were fine. But if I hadn't lost track of time, which I didn't, then something weird was going on with the time itself. The next day, I checked the porch cams. The footage showed the blackout, the freeze, then the dot appearing in the exact same spot, visible on every camera around the neighborhood. The strange thing was that all the videos had the same glitch. The footage froze for exactly 17 seconds, Then the bright dot was there, unblinking, unchanging, before fading out. I tried to compare it to any known satellite or drone or even fireworks. Nothing matched. The more I looked into it, the more strange little details came up. The dot never made noise, not even a hum. No drones or planes flew nearby, no searchlights or police activity, and yet everyone in the neighborhood had the same blackout and camera freeze. The weirdest part was that no one wanted to talk about it. A few neighbors mentioned the blackout but shrugged off the camera glitch and the light. One guy said it was probably a glitch in the power grid, but none of us could explain how the light showed up so clearly on all the different cameras facing different directions. I asked Mrs. Lark if she saw it again. She said no, but she admitted she'd felt really anxious that night, like someone was watching. I kept thinking about that dot, how it reflected the stars wrong, shimmered like heat haze, and somehow made time feel slower. And the clock's not matching. I can't say what it was. Maybe a strange atmospheric thing, maybe a trick of the light, or something else. But I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't normal. Sprocket won't go near the porch light since that night. And I find myself double-checking the cameras every night, hoping not to see that same frozen moment again. I was staying in this tiny cabin right on the edge of the Oregon coast, out near Cape Perpetua. It was early October, and the weather had been all over the place. Rain, wind, then clear skies that felt almost cold enough to bite. I was there mostly to get away, clear my head. Work had been stressful, and the ocean always helped with that. I had this old pair of binoculars in the cabin, kind of a dusty, scratched up thing that belonged to the previous owner. I wasn't really using them for anything, just fiddling with them one night, trying to see how far out I could spot ships or whales or whatever. It was around 11:30 p.m., and the sky was really clear. The kind of night where the stars look like they're stuck on some black velvet backdrop. The ocean was calm, just this gentle dark stretch with waves barely rolling. I sat on the porch, the binoculars in my lap, wrapped in a blanket because the fog had started to roll in, but not thick yet. More like a damp mist hanging close to the ground. I was scanning the horizon, looking out past the headlands where the water just goes on forever. Then, something caught my eye. Not right away. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from the moon or a passing ship. But it didn't move like a ship, and there was no sound. I raised the binoculars and focused on this spot, maybe a mile or so out, just above the surface of the water. There was a shape there. Hard to describe exactly. It looked like a faint, shimmering outline hovering just above the waves. Not a solid thing. It reminded me of heat haze on a hot road, how the air looks like it's bending, but this was above the ocean on a cool night. The shape was dark against the sky, but also kind of translucent. And when I looked away and back again through the binoculars, it seemed to flicker in and out of view. I blinked a few times, checked the focus on the binoculars, even adjusted the lens to see if maybe the glass was fogging up or something, but it stayed there, shimmering. The weird part was how it reflected the stars. Normally, everything out on the ocean just swallows the light, but this shape somehow caught the stars differently. Like the stars were bending around it or getting distorted, but not just a blur, a subtle twist, like the pattern of the stars shifted ever so slightly inside the shape. I lowered the binoculars and looked with my naked eyes. Nothing. Just the dark ocean and a sky full of stars. But when I put the binoculars back up, the shape was there again, flickering like it was struggling to stay visible. I thought maybe I was imagining it, or it was some kind of mirage or reflection from the cabin windows. But I had already closed the window to my right and the porch light was off. No other light source around except the stars and a faint glow from the lighthouse farther down the coast. That light was steady and yellowish, and this shape didn't flash or move like it. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, just watching. The fog started to thicken, and the shape got harder to see, but I kept the binoculars trained in its direction. Then it got stranger. At one point, the binoculars slipped a little in my hands, and when I refocused, the shape was gone, not just out of view, completely gone. I scanned the whole horizon, moving the binoculars left and right, but nothing. just the regular dark ocean. Then I noticed something else. The sound of the ocean changed. It wasn't the usual gentle crash of waves on the rocks. It was quieter, almost muffled, like a heavy blanket had been thrown over everything. I strained to listen, and that's when I heard it, a low, steady hum. Not from the ocean or the wind, but coming from the direction where the shape had been. I put the binoculars down and looked up at the sky. No planes or helicopters flying by, no distant ships either. The hum was steady, but it wasn't loud. More like something vibrating in the air, just on the edge of hearing. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I called my dog Cal, a mixed husky with sharp eyes who'd been lying next to me on the porch. He perked up and stood, ears forward, nose twitching. He stared out toward the water, low growl starting in his throat, which was unusual because he's usually calm at night. I went inside to grab my phone and check the time. 11:55 p.m. No missed calls or messages, no strange notifications. I put on a jacket and stepped off the porch, trying to see if I could hear the hum better. The wind was picking up now, and the fog had gotten thick enough that I couldn't see the water from the porch anymore. I walked down the small path to the cliff edge nearby. The ocean was barely visible, just a dark blur beyond the white spray of the waves hitting the rocks below. The hum was gone. I looked back toward the porch, and for a moment the fog seemed to move faster than the wind. It felt like the night was closing in tighter, like I was being watched. But I couldn't find any movement in the shadows. I headed back inside and sat down, trying to shake off the feeling. Cal jumped up onto my lap, and I scratched behind his ears, but he was still alert, eyes darting toward the windows. I kept the binoculars nearby, but I didn't want to look outside again. I was tired, but I couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down. Around 1 a.m., I heard the humming again. It was faint, but definitely there, and this time it seemed to come from inside the cabin. Cal barked sharply, running to the door and scratching at it. I got up, flicked on the porch light, and opened the door. Nothing. No one around. The night was still foggy and quiet. I checked the windows. They were all locked. No signs anyone had been there. I sat back down, and that's when I noticed the binoculars. The lenses were fogged up from the inside, like someone had breathed on them. I wiped them off with my sleeve, looked through them one more time toward the ocean. Nothing. No shape, no shimmer, no star distortion. I put the binoculars down and finally managed to fall asleep in the chair. Cal curled at my feet. The next morning, I went down to the shore, trying to find any clue, a piece of trash, footprints, anything, but there was nothing out of place, just the usual driftwood and seaweed. Since then, I've kept the binoculars close, but I haven't seen that shape again. The hum comes back sometimes, always faint and just on the edge of hearing. I don't know what it was. I don't even know if it was really there, or if I was just too tired and lonely in that cabin. But it felt like something that wasn't meant to be seen. Something that slipped in and out of our world like it didn't quite belong. Cal doesn't like the coast at night anymore, and I don't blame him. I was parked on the shoulder of Highway 97, somewhere between Weed and Mount Shasta, late at night. Around 2:30 a.m., I guess. The kind of hour when the world outside your cab feels like it's holding its breath. I was doing my usual overnight run, hauling produce from California up to Oregon, trying to squeeze every hour I could before the morning rush. I pulled off for a break at this lonely stretch where the highway cuts through a narrow canyon. There wasn't a single other vehicle for miles, just my rig and the cold wind rolling down from the mountains. My dog, Rook, a scruffy border collie mix with ears that never quit twitching, was curled up on the passenger seat, half asleep. I had just cracked the door open a bit to get some fresh air because the cab gets stale after a few hours. The night was chilly, the kind that makes your breath fog up in the cab if you're not careful. I had my radio on, just faint noise in the background, the usual trucker chatter, mostly static and a few sleepy voices. Nothing interesting. I was scrolling through some playlists on my phone when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Beyond the guardrail, maybe 15 feet from the front of my truck, there was a shape hovering just above the ground. At first, I thought it might be some kind of animal, like a deer or a coyote standing really still, but this was different. It didn't look solid, not exactly. More like a silhouette made of thick, swirling smoke, or maybe a heat haze. It wasn't casting any light, but I could see it clearly against the road's shoulder dirt and the dark trees behind it. The weirdest part was how it moved. It wasn't walking or running. It paced back and forth slowly, maybe 5 or 6 feet at a time, almost like it was stuck in a loop. No feet touching the ground, just this dark, blurred shape gliding silently above the gravel. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was tired or the cold was messing with me. But Rook lifted his head and stared right at it too, low growl rumbling in his throat. I reached for my phone to take a picture, but the screen went black for a second, then came back on with no signal. Weird, but not unheard of out here. I flicked the flashlight app on and off a couple times, trying to get a better look. The shape didn't seem to care. No light reflected off it, no shadow, just that odd form pacing in the dark. Then I noticed the noise, a deep, low thrum vibrating through the air, so faint at first I almost missed it. It wasn't coming through the speakers or my radio. It was physical. I could feel it pressing in my chest, like standing near a big engine running quietly. Rook's growl stopped, and he sat up straight, ears pricked, but he wasn't barking or whining, just tense, like he knew something was wrong but couldn't say what. I rolled up the window, locked the doors, and grabbed my flashlight. I told Rook to stay put, though he was already glued to the seat. I leaned out to see if I could catch a better look, shining the light toward the shape. It vanished instantly, like someone flipped a switch. Just the dark road and empty dirt. I blinked, heart pounding, and then it was back. Same shape, same slow pacing. No sound except that thrum, which seemed to get louder for a moment, then quieter again. It didn't seem interested in me exactly, but it was definitely aware I was there. I pulled my phone out again, checked the time, 2:42 a.m., and tried to call dispatch. No signal. The radio was static. Even the GPS was frozen, stuck on the last location before the signal died. It was like the whole world went dead in this one spot. I thought about getting out to walk around, see if I could find anything unusual on the shoulder or the trees, but something stopped me. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a warning I couldn't ignore. The air felt thicker, heavier. My chest ached from the thrum, and Rook's hackles were raised. I locked the doors tight, leaned back, and tried to keep my eyes on the spot where it was pacing. It kept the same slow back and forth rhythm, like it was stuck in some endless loop just beyond the guardrail, never moving closer, never leaving. After maybe 10 minutes, the thrum faded and the shape dissolved into the darkness like smoke blown away by the wind. No sound, no movement, just empty night. I sat there for a long time, just breathing and listening to the quiet return. My phone buzzed suddenly. A single text from dispatch saying my next stop was rescheduled. I didn't respond. I waited until dawn started to bleed into the sky, then finally rolled out onto the highway. Rook was quiet the whole drive, eyes flicking to the side mirrors and windows, but never panicked. I haven't told anyone in detail about what I saw, mostly because I don't really know how to explain it. It wasn't an animal or a person. It wasn't even light or shadow in any normal sense. I still think about that shape pacing just beyond my truck, that low thrum I could feel in my chest, and the way the world went silent and dead around me for those minutes. I don't know what it was or why it showed up there, but it was real, and it wasn't alone. The trail camera was supposed to make my life easier. I set it up weeks ago along a quiet ridge in the Gila National Forest, just outside Silver City, New Mexico. My name's Eliza, and I study wildlife behavior, mostly deer, coyotes, and the occasional mountain lion. The cameras help me track movement without spending every night in the woods. Usually, the images are pretty straightforward. Blurred shapes darting through the brush, eyes glinting in the dark. But this time, something was off. I got back to camp just before sunset that day, tired from a long hike lugging gear. The air was dry and warm, the kind of heat that lingers after a summer afternoon. My dog Luna, a lanky blue heeler mix with a sharp nose and endless energy, was trailing behind me, sniffing every cactus and juniper she passed. We made it to the cabin I rent from the Forest Service for my research, a small wooden structure with creaky floors and a rusty stove. It felt good to sit down for a bit, but I was eager to check the footage from the camera on that ridge. The trail camera's SD card had dozens of images, most of them the usual nighttime wildlife. Deer caught in mid-leap, a fox running past with just a blur of fur and tail, raccoons scrambling through the underbrush. The motion sensors seemed to work fine, but the pictures were strange in one way. Every single animal in the photos was blurry, as if they were moving way faster than they could be. The motion blur was heavy, more than I'd ever seen from that camera. I thought maybe the camera was malfunctioning or the sensor was too sensitive. But then I noticed one frame that stood out. It was different from the rest. In this single photo, all the animals were perfectly still, completely sharp. The deer were standing frozen, their legs locked, no blur. The raccoons sat on a fallen log, motionless. Even a small bobcat crouched at the edge of the frame didn't have a flicker of movement. What made the picture even weirder was that every animal's eyes were fixed straight up, staring at something above them. I stared at that photo for a long time, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. I showed it to my colleague, Jonah, who's a bit skeptical about weird stuff, but a good scientist. He raised his eyebrows. That's odd. Animals don't usually freeze and all look in the same direction like that. You sure this isn't a glitch? I double-checked the camera. It's the only frame like this out of dozens, I said. And every other picture has that crazy motion blur. It's like the animals were moving 100 miles an hour, then just stopped dead in their tracks, eyes locked upward. Jonah shrugged, but I could tell he was intrigued. Maybe a rare predator or a loud noise could have startled them. I wanted to believe that, but it didn't explain why they all looked straight up or why the motion blur in the other pictures was so intense. The next night, I decided to hike up to the ridge myself. Luna came along, tail wagging, always ready for a walk. The sky was clear, the stars beginning to pop out one by one. It was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze and Luna's paws crunching on dry dirt. I set up a small camp near the camera spot and sat down on a rock. I had my flashlight, a thermos with coffee, and my notebook. Luna lay down beside me, alert but calm. We waited. After a while, I noticed the forest felt different. The usual nighttime sounds seemed muted. The crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, even Luna's breathing somehow felt quieter. Then, about 30 minutes in, a low hum started. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew steadily. I looked up. The sky was clear, but something above the tree line caught my eye. A faint glow pulsing gently, not like any plane or helicopter I'd ever seen. It wasn't flashing or blinking. It just hung there, smooth and steady, casting an odd light over the tops of the junipers. I pointed my flashlight upward, half expecting to see something real, but the beam faded uselessly into the night. Luna stood up, ears perked, staring intently. I called her back, but she didn't want to move. Then I noticed something else. The shadows beneath the trees shifted, but no breeze stirred the branches. The hum got louder, and the animals around us, mostly small birds and some distant rodents, grew completely silent. No rustling, no chirps. I felt like I was being watched. I reached for my radio to call Jonah, but the signal was gone. No bars, not a single blink. The only connection to the outside world had dropped. I stood up, holding Luna's leash tight. The glow was still there, a strange shape just beyond the treetops, hovering, almost too steady for anything natural. It wasn't making noise except for the hum. No engine, no whirring, nothing mechanical I could place. Then I noticed something in the clearing ahead. A faint shimmer, like heat waves, but cooler somehow. The air looked warped, bending the stars behind it. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, but it didn't go away. For a moment, time felt slow, stretched out. Luna growled low and pulled back against her leash. I took a step back, and then suddenly, the hum stopped. The glow vanished, the shimmer disappeared, and the forest sounds rushed back all at once. Birds chirped, leaves rustled. Luna shook herself and wagged her tail like nothing had happened. I checked my watch. Only about 10 minutes had passed since the glow appeared, but it felt like hours. I hurried back down the trail, Luna trotting faithfully beside me, ears twitching at every sound. When I got to the cabin, I tried the radio again. Signal returned instantly. The phone worked too. I looked at the photos from the camera one more time that night. The frozen animals, eyes staring upward, the blurred images before and after. Something had been there with them. I don't know what it was or why it showed up, but I keep thinking about those silent eyes and that impossible stillness. I'm not sure if I want to go back to that ridge, but I will. Luna's already restless again and I need more data. Maybe next time I'll catch whatever that thing was a little clearer. Or maybe not. Either way, I'm watching. I was working the late shift at the weather station on a Tuesday night when it happened. My name's Nathan. I'm a meteorologist, been doing this for almost 8 years now. Nothing in the job really surprises me anymore. You get used to the quirks of storms, radar glitches, and weird atmospheric phenomena. But that night, I saw something I still can't explain. It was late May, around 11 p.m., and we were tracking a pretty strong storm system moving through the Midwest. The station where I worked was in a small town outside Springfield, Missouri. The weather had been building all day. Thunderstorms, heavy rain, and a strong cold front pushing through. I'd been monitoring the radar and satellite feeds from my desk for hours, watching the storm's progression. The radar screen showed the usual stuff: high reflectivity areas, cells merging, some rotation hints, the normal warnings. But then something caught my eye. A particular storm cell, about 50 miles southeast of us, moving northeast, started to behave oddly. On the radar, the storm literally split in two. I mean, like a perfect line down the middle, one chunk peeled away from the other cleanly and immediately. It wasn't some gradual division, no merging cells nearby to explain it. The storm just divided. The left half kept moving northeast, while the right half shifted slightly east. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe it was a radar glitch or a software hiccup. I quickly checked the other radars we monitor and the satellite feed. Everything confirmed the split was real. Then, about 15 seconds after the split, something else appeared on the satellite images. It was brief, a small, metallic-looking object, maybe 100 meters in diameter, hovering just above the storm. It showed up as a reflective patch, brighter than the clouds around it, perfectly circular, like a disc. It lasted maybe 10 seconds on the feed before vanishing completely. My heart skipped. I called over my coworker, Lydia. She came rushing over, eyes wide when she saw the satellite image. We both froze, staring at the screen. "What the hell is that?" she whispered. I had no answer. We checked the usual databases for aircraft or drones in the area. Nothing. No flight plans, no military exercises reported. The FAA radar didn't pick up anything unusual. No commercial or private flights in that sector at the time. I tried to replay the satellite footage again and again, zooming in, adjusting contrast, but the object was gone after those few seconds. The storm was still there, broken into two parts now drifting apart. We kept watching the radar and satellite for the next hour. The split storm behaved like two separate systems. No sign of the object coming back. That whole night, my mind kept going back to those images. I even stayed after my shift to review the data again, hoping I'd missed some clue. The weirdness wasn't just the storm splitting or the sudden appearance of that metallic shape. It was the silence afterward. No one else seemed to notice. No reports on the news, no chatter from other weather stations. It was like it never happened. I thought maybe I was hallucinating or the equipment was malfunctioning, but the data was there in black and white. The storm split, the object appeared, and then nothing. Since then, I've checked other satellite feeds from different providers. Some of them showed strange artifacts or blips in the same area and time frame, but none as clear as what I saw. I told a couple close friends in meteorology, but they just shrugged it off. Probably a glitch, or maybe some rare atmospheric reflection, one said. But I'm not convinced. The storm split perfectly, like it was cut in half by some invisible line. And that object? It wasn't a plane, a drone, or a satellite artifact. It looked real, solid. Every time I look at the footage, I get that uneasy feeling, like I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. I keep wondering what that thing was doing there, hovering over the storm, and why it disappeared so suddenly. The whole event felt like it was on the edge of reality, something just out of reach, slipping between what we can explain and what we can't. I still don't have answers, But I'm sure of one thing. That night, the storm didn't just split, it was interrupted by something completely different. Something I'll probably never fully understand. I got this voicemail on my phone one evening last spring, but the weird part is the timestamp. It showed it was left at exactly 9:17 p.m., which wouldn't be strange except that at that time I was hiking alone in the middle of the Cascade Mountains, out in the wilderness, no cell service at all. My phone didn't get a signal until hours later when I got back to my car. That's what freaked me out first. How did the voicemail get recorded then? Let me back up a bit. My name's Elise, and I'm an amateur hiker and photographer. I usually go out by myself on weekdays after work to avoid the crowds. The trail I chose that day was a moderate one near Mount Hood, about 8 miles round trip through forest and some rocky ridges. The weather was clear but cool, just a little breeze. I left my phone in airplane mode once I got a couple miles in because, well, there's no point dragging it around just to check notifications when there's no signal. I was deep into the trail, about 3 miles from the trailhead, when I noticed the woods felt off. The usual bird sounds were absent, and the forest was unnervingly quiet. Not like peaceful quiet, but like the kind of silence where you catch yourself listening for anything. I stopped for a minute and tried to shake it off. A couple of times, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, just shadows shifting, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. Just trees and bushes. I kept walking. My dog, Scout, a 5-year-old Aussie Shepherd mix, was with me. Usually he's hyper, sniffing everything, pulling on the leash, but that day he was oddly calm, just sticking close and staring intently into the woods on my left side. I figured maybe a deer or something had passed through, but Scout was still tense, ears pinned back, eyes fixed. At one point, I noticed the air felt heavy, like there was static or electricity in it. Not the normal kind, but more subtle. It's hard to explain. It was almost like the hairs on my arms stood up for no reason. Scout's tail went stiff. Then I heard it, this faint mechanical whirring. At first, I thought it was some distant generator or machinery, maybe from a logging operation or campers. But the area I was in was protected forest. No way anyone was working there, especially midweek. The whirring sound was low and rhythmic, almost like something rotating slowly, but it didn't get louder or change in pitch. It just hung in the air, blending in with the silence. I stopped walking and looked around. Scout growled softly, low in his throat, fixed on a spot about 20 feet off the trail. I shone my flashlight into the trees there, but saw nothing but the dark shapes of branches. The weirdness didn't end there. My phone buzzed. I didn't have reception, but the screen lit up like I'd gotten a message or call. When I pulled it out, it showed a new voicemail notification. I was sure it was impossible because of no signal. Later, after I finished the hike and got back to my car, my phone finally connected to the network. The voicemail showed up in my inbox. It was time-stamped for the exact time I was standing there in the woods. When I listened to it, it was just static. At first, I thought it was a bad recording or a glitch, but then I heard it underneath the static. This faint mechanical whirring, like the exact same sound I'd heard in the forest. The whole message lasted about 15 seconds. No voices, no words, just that high-pitched whirring under layers of static. I played it over and over, trying to catch any patterns or clues. It was like the sound was cycling, a mechanical hum mixed with interference, but nothing I could identify. After a while, I showed it to a couple friends who are into audio stuff and paranormal stories. They couldn't figure it out either. One said it reminded him of the sound from old reel-to-reel machines or some kind of analog equipment malfunctioning. What freaked me out more was the timing. How did a voicemail get recorded when my phone was off-network in an area with zero coverage? I don't remember hearing the phone ring or vibrate all while I was on the trail. Over the next few days, I kept checking the area where I heard the sound. I wanted to see if I could catch whatever was making it, but nothing. No mechanical noise, no strange hum, just forest, trees, and the usual animals coming out at dusk. Scout stayed close to me every time we went back. He seemed on edge, like he was expecting something. I even caught him growling at empty spots, just like before. One night, about a week later, I was lying in bed and my phone buzzed again with a voicemail alert. This time, it was just pure static, no whirring underneath, but the timestamp said it was sent at 2:03 a.m., hours after I'd gone to sleep. I didn't answer or call anyone back. I haven't gotten another voicemail since, but I don't leave my phone in normal mode when I'm out hiking anymore. I keep wondering if what I heard was something mechanical, some old equipment forgotten in the forest, or something else entirely. The way the sound was so quiet, so controlled, it didn't seem natural. And the voicemail timing, well, I don't have any explanation for that part. I still go back to that trail sometimes, but I'm always watching, always listening for that faint whirring beneath the silence. I was driving home late one Friday night on this stretch of highway that runs through the foothills outside of Salem, Oregon. It's the kind of road that's mostly empty at night, just long, winding asphalt through trees and some open fields, and it's usually quiet, except for the occasional truck or late-night commuter like me. That night, it was clear and cool, early spring with a little chill in the air but no wind. I'd just gotten off a double shift at the diner where I work, and I was tired, looking forward to crashing once I got home. I was about halfway through the drive, maybe 10 miles out of town, when I noticed something weird up ahead. At first, it looked like a plane was hovering right over the highway. I don't mean flying low or anything normal. It was just there, completely still, hanging maybe 50 or 60 feet off the ground. No lights blinking, no sound, nothing. Just a dark shape against the clear night sky. I slowed down and blinked a few times, thinking maybe it was some kind of crane or a weird drone or even a helicopter, but the way it just hovered without any noise threw me off. There was no blinking light on it at all, which is strange for anything flying over a road. As I got closer, I saw it start to rotate slowly, like it was turning around an invisible axis. The shape was kind of triangular, but nothing I recognized from any aircraft I'd ever seen. The edges were smooth, and it didn't look like it had wings or rotors. Just this silent, dark mass that was moving slowly in place. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling a little uneasy. My headlights didn't seem to shine on it properly. The surface was almost absorbing the light. I kept watching it in my rearview mirror as I passed underneath. It didn't move forward or sideways, just rotated slowly, completely silent. I couldn't see any support, no cables, no poles, no engines. I wasn't the only one who saw it. A few weeks later, I found a local online forum where people were talking about the same thing. Drivers reported seeing this dark triangular shape hovering in the exact same spot along the highway, usually between 10:30 and midnight. Everyone described it the same way. Silent, no blinking lights, slow rotation, no visible means of support. A couple of people said their phones lost signal or their GPS acted weird around that stretch of road. I didn't notice that myself, but I didn't check either. I was just glad to get home. The next time I drove that way, I tried to leave later, hoping to see it again or at least figure out what it was. I got there around 11:15 p.m., and for a while, nothing, just the quiet road, the smell of pine, and my headlights cutting through the dark. Then, out of nowhere, the same dark shape appeared, hovering over the same spot, rotating slowly. I slowed down like last time, watching carefully, but I swear, my radio started to cut out, like static crackling in and out. The signal was spotty for a few seconds, then came back. The thing didn't move or make a sound. I thought about stopping and getting out of the car, but something made me stay put. I kept my eyes on it as I drove past again, but by the time I was 10 miles down the road, it was gone. I told a coworker about it, but he just laughed it off, said I was probably tired or imagining things. Another driver I talked to said they saw the same thing about a month earlier, but thought it was a weather balloon or a military test. That made me wonder if it was some secret government stuff, but I'd never seen a balloon just sit still and rotate like that, and no noise doesn't add up. The weirdest part was how calm it felt. Not like you'd expect, right? You'd think seeing something like that would freak you out, but I was just quiet. Like the thing didn't want me to be scared or anything. Just there, watching. After a few weeks, I stopped driving that route late at night. I figured it was better not to mess with whatever that was. One night, I was coming back from a friend's place, about 2 a.m., and I noticed headlights behind me. Thought it was someone just catching up, but as I glanced in my mirror, the car behind me slowed down too, then stopped on the shoulder. I pulled over to see if they needed help or something. The driver was a woman named Laura, a local from down the road. She told me she'd seen the same dark shape hovering over the highway that night and had been too creeped out to drive past it. We talked for a bit, and she said she felt like the thing was watching her too, like it was waiting. Neither of us could explain what it was or why it just sat there spinning slowly. The next morning, I went back out with my phone camera, hoping to catch something. But no matter how many times I passed that spot during the day, the shape never appeared. It was like it only showed up at night, in the dark. I never saw it again after that last sighting, but every time I drive that highway at night now, I glance up, half expecting to see it hovering silently, rotating, waiting. No flashing lights, no noise, just there, watching. I woke up because something was itching at the back of my neck, but it wasn't like the usual kind of itch. It felt sharper, almost like tiny needles. I rolled over, groggy, and saw a faint red glow through my window. It wasn't the streetlights or headlights from the road behind the house. This was different, kind of. Unnatural. I live in this old 2-story house in a sleepy suburb in northern Oregon. My name's Carter, I'm 17, and nothing like this had ever happened around here. The sky was clear when I went to bed. No clouds or wind. So that weird red glow was the first weird thing. I got up and looked out my bedroom window toward the roof, thinking maybe a fire or something. Nothing was burning, but the glow was coming from above the house. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out the window onto the roof ladder Dad installed for cleaning gutters. My heart was pounding a little, not from fear, exactly, just because it was late and I was suddenly wide awake. When I reached the roof, I saw it right away. Dozens of tiny round burns in the shingles, arranged in a perfect hexagonal grid. The spots were small, maybe half an inch each, and the way they were spaced out looked almost too perfect to be natural. The sun hadn't come up yet, but the faint red glow was still there, hovering above the trees across the street. I crouched down and inspected the burns. The shingles were scorched around each dot, but no melted edges or soot, just these neat little holes like someone had carefully burned them with a tiny torch. I thought maybe some vandal or idiot with fireworks, but the pattern was so precise, it didn't make sense. I called my mom, who was up for work early, but she thought I was joking when I told her about the burns. Maybe raccoons, she said, but raccoons don't make perfect shapes on a roof, and they sure as hell don't leave tiny burn marks. After that, I went back inside and checked the news. Nothing about storms, lightning, or anything unusual nearby. I even looked up local lightning strike maps online. The closest sensor was just a couple of miles from my house, and there wasn't a single recorded strike all night. The weather apps showed clear skies and calm winds. At school the next day, I told my friends about it. Some laughed, some thought I was messing with them, but none of them had explanations. Nobody else had seen anything weird. That night, I stayed up on the roof again, hoping to catch something. Maybe a firework, a plane, or some light source. I had my phone out, recording with the flashlight on, but hours passed, and nothing happened. No lights, no sounds, just the quiet hum of crickets. When I finally came down around midnight, I noticed something else. A faint ringing in my ears, like a soft electrical buzz. I hadn't noticed it before. It stayed with me for the next day or two, barely loud enough to really notice unless it was quiet. A few days later, I was walking home from baseball practice when I saw a couple of people standing by the field across the street from my house, pointing cameras up at the sky. They were talking about some weird lights that had been spotted over the neighborhood a few nights ago. I didn't say anything of lengths, but it hit me. Maybe that red glow wasn't just in my head. The weirdest part was when my dad finally took a look at the roof. He's a handyman and was as baffled as I was. He said the shingles looked scorched but didn't smell burned, and the holes didn't go all the way through. like something had focused heat or energy without physically damaging the wood underneath. I kept thinking about the pattern, the way the burns lined up like some kind of message or design. But when I tried to show someone else, they just saw a bunch of tiny burn marks. No pattern. And the red glow, it never showed up again. Weeks went by and things returned to normal. The burns stayed on the roof, slowly fading in color but never disappearing. The ringing in my ears went away and the neighborhood was quiet. But sometimes when I'm outside at night, I get this strange feeling, like something is watching. I glance up at the sky, hoping to see something, anything, to make sense of it all. But the sky stays empty, except for the stars. I was walking my dog, Jasper, late one evening in early spring. Around 8 p.m., the sky still light but fading fast. We usually stuck to the trail behind my place in rural Vermont, a long stretch that runs alongside some open fields and woods. It's quiet out there, especially at that hour, just the occasional car far off on the main road, the sound of crickets starting up. Jasper had been pretty energetic that day, a mix of border collie and lab, so I figured a long walk would tire him out. The air was cool but not cold, the kind of weather where you wear a light jacket and maybe a hat. There was some leftover haze from earlier rain, low and wispy, hovering over the fields, softening the edges of everything. We were about halfway down the trail when Jasper suddenly stopped. He was sniffing along the grass, nose to the ground like usual, then just froze. Ears straight up, his whole body stiffening. He turned and looked directly at the open field to our left. No trees, just grass stretching out to a distant line of woods. I called his name. Jasper? Nothing. He didn't even blink. Then he let out this low growl, quiet but tense, like he was warning me. I scanned the field, half expecting to see some animal, maybe a deer or a coyote sneaking through the tall grass. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound besides the creak of branches swaying in the breeze. That's when I noticed it, a faint ringing in the air. High-pitched, barely noticeable at first, like a distant tuning fork or the tiny whine of an old fluorescent light bulb. It wasn't coming from any direction I could pick out. It seemed to fill the space around us. I looked at Jasper, whose growling stopped, replaced by an alertness so sharp I could practically see it. The ringing grew just a little louder, enough that I was sure I wasn't imagining it. My skin prickled, the hairs on my neck standing on end. I scanned the field again. It was still empty. Then, as suddenly as it started, the ringing cut off. Complete silence. Jasper dropped his guard too, but stayed close to me, eyes darting around like he was trying to figure out what was going on. I wanted to call it a weird sensory thing, maybe some distant power line humming, or an animal's high-frequency call I just couldn't identify. But the silence that followed was heavy, almost oppressive. No crickets, no birds, no wind in the trees, just nothing. I reached down and petted Jasper, trying to calm both of us. He looked up at me, then back at the field, still uneasy but not growling anymore. I debated whether to keep walking or turn around. The weirdness made me want to head home, but something made me push on. We moved a few steps deeper into the trail when I caught movement near the tree line at the edge of the field. Just a flash, like a shadow slipping behind a trunk. I stopped dead. Jasper pulled at the leash, alert again, body tense. I whispered, "Who's there?" But no answer came. The forest stayed still, no rustling or snapping twigs. I kept walking, faster now, with Jasper close. Every so often I'd glance back toward the field, half expecting to see those 3 red lights or whatever that other people talk about in stories. But there was nothing. The whole way back to my truck, the ringing never returned. The night noises came back, the crickets and frogs filling the air again, normal like nothing had happened. I still think about that moment. The frozen dog, the ringing that appeared out of nowhere, then vanished, and the silent field with nothing in it but empty grass. I can't explain any of it, but I know what I saw and heard that night. It's just strange. I didn't expect to be writing this down, honestly. Never really been the type to believe in weird stuff, but what happened that weekend in the Colorado Rockies has stuck with me, and I guess putting it into words might help me make some kind of sense of it. Me and my buddy Darren had planned a quick camping trip up near the Indian Peaks Wilderness. We wanted something low-key, just a couple nights away from the city noise. We drove up Friday afternoon, and after a couple hours on a dirt road that got narrower and bumpier the higher we went, we found a small clearing near a creek. It wasn't marked on any map, just a spot Darren had found years ago on a hiking forum. We figured it'd be quiet, and it was. The day was clear but cold, early October, and the sun was dropping fast by the time we set up camp. Darren pitched the tent while I gathered some firewood. His dog, a big goofy mutt named Rufus, ran around sniffing everything, happy as could be. The woods were dense around us, tall pines with thick branches, and the creek babbled softly nearby. That first night was normal. We ate some canned chili, drank some beer, and talked about nothing much. The sky was clear, stars shining bright. Rufus curled up between us, occasionally lifting his head to listen to sounds in the woods. But then around midnight, things started to get weird. At first, it was this soft knocking sound, like someone tapping a stick against wood, but steady and rhythmic. It wasn't coming from the trees or the ground. It was coming from above. I looked up, thinking maybe it was a branch rubbing against the tent or something, but the tent was quiet and the knocking was too regular to be wind. Darren heard it too. We both sat up listening. Knock, pause, knock, pause, knock, knock, pause, knock. It wasn't a pattern I could make sense of, but it wasn't random either. It reminded me of Morse code or some kind of signal. We stayed quiet, eyes on the treetops, but couldn't see anything. Rufus got uneasy. He stood up and growled low, his ears perked forward. Then Darren spotted something. Above the clearing, between the tops of the pines, 3 red lights blinked in sequence. Slowly, calmly, like a triangle. They hovered there, not moving and totally silent. At first, I thought maybe it was some sort of drone or remote-controlled thing, but the lights weren't flashing like drone LEDs. They blinked one at a time, steady like a signal, and there was no noise, no buzzing, no engine hum, just this strange knocking in the blinking lights. I tried to focus my eyes to see if I could make out any shape around the lights, but there was nothing visible. Just 3 points of red light, perfectly spaced, floating way too still. The knocking kept going, steady and calm, as if it were coming from the lights themselves. I wanted to call out or wave, but Darren shook his head. We both just watched. The forest felt dead quiet besides the knocking. The usual night sounds, crickets, owls, rustling, were all gone. After maybe 10 minutes, the lights blinked faster, the knocking speeded up too. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. No knocking, no blinking, nothing. Just the black sky with stars again. We waited a few minutes, but the lights didn't come back. I checked my phone. No signal, which wasn't a surprise this far out. Darren turned on his flashlight and shone it around. The woods looked normal, the creek still flowing, Rufus cautiously sniffing around. Neither of us said much. We tried to laugh it off as some kind of weird coincidence or a prank from other campers, but there was no one else out there for miles. The next day, we found no footprints or signs anyone else had been near the clearing. The ground was undisturbed. No trash or tracks. That night, the knocking and lights didn't come back, but I kept waking up feeling like something was watching us. Rufus stayed glued to Darren's side, growling at shadows I couldn't see. We packed up early the next morning, not wanting to stick around longer than necessary. On the drive back down the mountain, I kept glancing at the sky, half expecting to see those lights again. I still don't know what that knocking was or where those red lights came from. Nothing I've ever read or seen matches it. No sound, no shape, just a strange signal from the sky that vanished like it never happened. I've told a few friends about it, but no one really knows what to make of it either. I'm not sure I do. It's the kind of thing that doesn't fit anywhere, like a secret hidden in the dark between the trees. I've been into drones for a few years now, mostly just flying my quadcopter around fields and parks near where I live in western Kansas. Nothing fancy, just a hobby to kill time on weekends. I'm not a professional or anything, but I enjoy the challenge of getting smooth shots and trying to map out patterns in the land from above. That Saturday was unusually warm for April. the kind of dry heat that sits heavy in the air even after the sun goes down. I decided to take my drone out late afternoon around 6 p.m. when the sun was low and the shadows stretched long across the fields. I figured the lighting would be good for some cool aerial shots. I loaded the drone into the back of my truck and drove out to a spot I'd been meaning to check for a while, a patch of farmland about 5 miles east of my place, just off a gravel county road. I'd heard some locals mention strange crop patterns around there, but I always thought it was just weird growth or normal farmer stuff. Nothing serious. When I got there, the field was just a big rectangular stretch of corn. The stalks were just starting to green up, but in one corner I noticed it looked different. There were patterns in the crop, almost geometric but uneven, like someone had pressed down the plants in wide arcs and circles. Nothing like the classic crop circles you hear about on the news, but still weird enough to catch my eye. I set up the drone, did a quick systems check, and launched it straight up. The controls were responsive, signal strong, and the camera feed crisp on my tablet. I flew it low over the crop field, aiming the camera down to catch the patterns from above. As I guided it closer to the strange part of the field, the feed started to glitch. Small flickers at first, like interference, but then the video froze for a moment and the drone's controls got sluggish. I thought maybe it was a glitch in the hardware or signal interference from something nearby. I tried moving the drone back toward me, but the controls felt delayed, like it was dragging behind. Then the screen went black for a second. The drone was still up there, but the feed was gone. No signal. I waited. Hit the reconnect button on the app a few times. Nothing. I called out loud, like that would help. Come on, buddy. Don't do this to me. The drone kept drifting over the crop patterns, out of sight behind a small rise at the edge of the field. I jumped in my truck and drove toward where it was last seen, hoping the signal would come back if I got closer. When I reached the edge of the field, I stepped out and looked around. The patterns stretched out before me in the fading light, those flattened arcs and circles. The air was still, no wind, no bird song, just this eerie quiet. I walked into the field, moving carefully so I wouldn't trample the plants. The dirt underfoot was dry and cracked. The patterns weren't smooth or perfect, more like someone had pressed down the stalks with their feet or a board, but there was no trail leading in or out, no footprints. I called for the drone again, hoping it'd buzz back to me on its own. Nothing. Suddenly there was this bright flash of light overhead. It was quick, like someone shone a massive flashlight straight down, not from a plane or helicopter. No sound either, which was odd for something that bright. I blinked and looked up, but the sky was just a deep blue with the first stars coming out. No source for the light. It felt unnatural, like the kind of brightness you don't expect in a field late at night. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to keep looking around. The air felt heavier. The temperature seemed to drop. I shivered even though it wasn't cold before. After a few minutes, I checked my tablet again. The drone app was back online. The feed popped up with static at first, then cleared. The drone was hovering above the field, just outside the circle patterns, but the camera was pointing straight up, at the sky. I tapped to rotate the camera down. The feed flickered again, then suddenly cut to a bright white flash that filled the whole screen. It lasted maybe a second before the feed went dead again. I hit every button trying to reconnect, but it never came back. I stood there for what felt like a long time. The sun had almost completely set, and the field looked like a patchwork of black and green under the early stars. My skin prickled like I was being watched. Eventually, I packed up and left. The drone was gone. No signal, no GPS location. I called the manufacturer's support line the next day, but they said if it's out of range or powered down, there's no way to track it. I went back a few times in the following weeks, but the crop patterns were gone. The field was just normal corn again, evenly grown, no flattened circles, no strange arcs. And the drone? It showed up in the mail about a month later. No note, no package slip, just my quadcopter in the original box with the battery fully drained. I plugged it in, powered it up, and reviewed the last saved videos. The only thing saved was a few seconds of static, then that sudden flash of light from the sky. Nothing else. I still don't know what happened that night, or why the drone lost signal right over those patterns, or where it went for that whole month before showing up at my door. All I know is that field, those patterns, and that light didn't fit anything I understand. And I've stopped going out there. We were heading back from fishing out near Lake Meredith, me, Tessa, and my cousin Wyatt. It was late, somewhere past 11, and we'd taken the old service road instead of the highway, which was probably stupid, but we were in Wyatt's truck, and he liked cutting through that stretch for the view, even though it's just brush, dirt, and wind turbines. We didn't see another car for miles, just dry, flat land and those tall white turbines spinning slow in the dark. The sky was clear, no moon, but you could see every star. It was one of those weirdly warm spring nights, like it should have been cold, but the air felt heavy and still. No wind at all. We were maybe 15 minutes from getting back to town when we saw the car. It was a gray sedan, parked half in the road and half on the shoulder, maybe 30 yards ahead. Headlights were on. Driver's door hanging wide open. Engine running, we could hear it as we got closer, Zard, this soft, uneven hum that didn't sound right. Wyatt slowed down and we just sort of stared at it. No one inside, no movement. He pulled over a few feet back from it and left his truck running. None of us got out at first. We were just quiet. Then Tessa said, "That's weird," and I remember her voice sounded flat. Not scared exactly, just off. I got out first, walked up slow, hands in my hoodie pocket. I think part of me expected someone to pop out, maybe a guy peeing in the bushes or someone changing a flat, but there weren't any bushes, and the tires were fine. I leaned in and looked around the interior, purse on the passenger seat, phone in the cup holder, keys still in the ignition. The headlights were shining out into the field beside the road, and that's when I saw it. Right where the beams hit, maybe 30 feet ahead, was a perfect circle of scorched grass, not trampled, not burned like from a fire, just blackened. Charred all the way through, but nothing around it was touched. Just this flat, round patch about the size of a backyard pool, maybe 15 feet across. Wyatt came up behind me and said, "That ain't a campfire." And he was right. There was no debris, no tire tracks near it, no sign of anything burning its way in or out. And the weirdest part, the grass wasn't flattened. It was still standing up, just dead, black and brittle like it had been cooked straight through. Tessa stayed in the truck. She rolled the window down and asked if we should call it in. I said, yeah, maybe. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the car and the patch in the same frame. But when I opened the gallery to check, it was just black. Like the lens cap had been on, even though it obviously wasn't. I tried again. Same thing, just pure black squares. Not blurry, not overexposed, just nothing. I didn't say anything right then. I just stuck the phone back in my pocket. Wyatt circled the sedan, looking for signs of damage. There weren't any. The rear passenger door had a small smear of mud on it, like someone brushed past in a hurry. That was it. The grass along the edge of the field hadn't been stepped on either. No trail, no prints. He popped his head into the driver's side and looked around. "It's in park," he said. "Full tank. Windows down in the back, no wallet." I asked if it could have been stolen and ditched. He just gave me a look like, stolen and ditched in the middle of nowhere with the lights on and the keys still in it? Didn't add up. We stood there for a bit, not saying much, just listening. The air felt wrong, like it was too quiet. No bugs, no wind, just that low hum of the engine and the turbines turning way off in the distance. Then something buzzed, Wyatt's phone. He checked it and frowned. "No service," he said, and held it up like that'd change anything. I looked at mine. Same. No bars, which didn't make sense because we were close enough to the wind farm that there were usually 3 towers in range. I'd streamed YouTube in that area before. Wyatt said we should drive into town and report it. Let the sheriff's office handle it. I agreed. But then he turned to get back in the truck and froze. What the hell? I looked. Tessa was gone. Passenger door still shut, window still down. Her seat was empty. I took off running, yelled her name. No answer. I ran around the side of the truck, half expecting her to be crouched behind it messing with us, but she wasn't there. Driver's side door still shut too. The grass on the shoulder undisturbed. It couldn't have been more than 10 seconds since we saw her last. She couldn't have gotten far. There was nothing to hide behind anyway, just flat land and sky and that burnt circle out in the field. Wyatt shouted and took off toward it. I followed. We got to the edge and stopped. It was cold near the patch. Not like a breeze, just colder. The air dropped 10 degrees. You could feel it in your teeth. The soil crunched under our boots like it had been through a fire, but there was no ash. Nothing drifting or smoldering. Just dry blackness. We circled the edge. No tracks in or out. No sound except our breathing. Then we heard the truck horn. We spun around, headlights flashed. Tessa was back in the truck, sitting in the front seat, eyes wide. She looked pale. Wyatt sprinted back, calling her name. I was right behind him. When we got there, she was shaking. Said she didn't remember leaving the truck. 1 second she was watching us by the sedan. The next, she was sitting in the seat, alone. She swore she hadn't moved. But her boots were dusty like she'd been walking through the field, and there was a smudge of soot on the back of her jacket. We didn't ask more questions. We just left. We drove straight to the sheriff's office and reported the car, gave the location, told them it looked abandoned, left out the rest. Next morning, we called to follow up. The deputy said they'd found the vehicle, but nothing unusual. Just a stalled sedan, engine cold, no sign of the owner. Towed it to impound. No mention of the scorched grass. No report of the door being open. I asked if they found a purse or phone inside. They said no. Clean interior. Nothing of note. I checked my phone again later that day. The pictures I'd taken were gone. Not even black squares anymore. Just missing. Like they never existed. The only trace was a blank spot in my camera roll where the thumbnail skipped a few seconds. We didn't talk about it again after that. Not really. Tessa won't go near that part of the county anymore. Wyatt sold the truck a few months later, claimed it had electrical issues, but I never saw any. I still think about that car. The way the engine sounded like it was straining. The way the grass was just dead in a perfect circle. I don't have a word for what we saw. All I know is we weren't supposed to be there. It started around 11:40 p.m. on a Thursday. I remember because I'd just finished brushing my teeth and was about to take the trash out when the kitchen light blinked off, came back on, then went out again completely. The house went quiet in that weird way where you don't realize how much noise there is until it's gone. The fridge hum, the ceiling fan, the neighbor's TV through the wall, all of it just stopped. At first I figured it was just our power. Happens a few times a year. I grabbed the flashlight from the junk drawer and stepped out onto the porch. We live in a little town called Pinefield, tucked in the hills about an hour south of Erie. Real small, one gas station, no traffic lights, that kind of place. But even from my porch, I could see the rest of the street was dark too. No porch lights, no street lamps. The whole town looked like it had been unplugged. I was standing out there trying to get a signal on my phone when I noticed something strange about the sky. It wasn't dark. There was this soft flickering glow coming from the direction of the woods east of town, just past the old fire road. It reminded me of heat lightning, but steadier, more rhythmic. Sort of pulsed, like the way a candle flickers in a draft, but brighter, whiter. Then I heard the hum. At first I thought it was just in my head, a low vibration, almost like a diesel engine idling far off. But there were no cars moving, and it wasn't coming from the ground. It was overhead. Not right above me, but up and out toward the trees. Deep and low, but not loud. You could feel it more than hear it. I walked down the steps with the flashlight still off. I didn't want to mess up my eyes adjusting. A couple houses over, Mrs. Abbott's porch light flicked on and off once, then stayed out. I saw her silhouette behind the curtain like she was looking out too. I waved, but she didn't wave back. The hum started getting louder. Not by a lot, just enough to notice. It wasn't steady, it would sort of swell and dip like something spinning, and the light behind the trees got brighter, more defined. I could make out the shape of it now. It wasn't a beam or a spotlight, it was a dome. A half sphere of white-blue light, maybe a mile or two past the tree line, sitting above the horizon like a bubble on the verge of popping. It flickered in this odd way, like each pulse was slightly out of sync with the next. It didn't look like fire or electricity. It didn't look like anything I could name. I wasn't the only one seeing it. Down the road, I spotted Dean, the guy who runs the mechanic shop, standing in the middle of his yard with a pair of binoculars around his neck. I walked over. He didn't say anything for a while, just kept staring toward the trees like he was waiting for something to come out of them. "You hear it?" I asked. He nodded. "Started about 10 minutes ago. Lost power just before." "You seen lightning like that before?" "Nope." We stood there together for a bit, not talking. His dog, Pepper, was pacing in circles in the yard, sniffing the air, tail low. Not barking, not whining, just agitated. It was strange because she's usually loud as hell. I reached down to pet her and she flinched. After a few more minutes, the hum got deeper. Not louder exactly, it just felt like it moved lower into my chest. Like when a plane flies directly over you and the pressure shifts in your ears. My vision felt a little off, too, like everything had a slight shimmer around the edges. I kept blinking, thinking I was just tired or something. Then the light blinked. I don't mean it dimmed, it shut off. 1 second there was this huge, glowing dome over the trees, the next it was just gone. The darkness hit like someone dropped a blanket over the sky. No flicker, no fade, just click, out. And with it, the hum stopped. Everything went totally still. It was so quiet I could hear Pepper panting. Dean turned to me and said, "That ain't natural." Before I could say anything back, every car alarm on the street went off at once. Just a sudden burst of noise, honking, lights flashing, horns blaring. My flashlight flickered and died in my hand. I fumbled to turn it back on, but it wouldn't respond. Then they all stopped at once. Same way the light had. Just off. I started feeling dizzy after that. Not like spinning, more like my depth perception was off. I looked up and realized the stars were back. All of them. But wrong. It's hard to explain. They were there, but not where they should have been. The Big Dipper looked tilted, and Orion was higher than I remembered. I don't know enough about astronomy to say for sure, but it felt wrong. Just off enough to notice. Dean was staring at the sky, too. He whispered something I didn't catch, then turned and went inside without another word. I stayed out for a few more minutes. The air smelled weird, like warm electronics, the way an old TV smells after it's been running too long. Around midnight, the power came back. Lights flicked on one by one down the street. The hum didn't come back. The stars looked normal again. My flashlight started working like nothing had happened. Next day, I went into town and asked around. The folks over in Marlow and Stanton, the next 2 towns over, said they'd had the same outage. About 20 minutes long, just after 11:30. Power cut out with no warning. Some of them mentioned hearing a vibration, and a few said their phones went dead and wouldn't turn back on until morning. One guy, Randy Beck, who lives way out past the ridge, said he saw the light too. Described it the same way, dome-shaped, flickering, hovering above the trees. Said he thought a transformer blew at first, but there was no smoke or fire, and no crews came out after. What stuck with me the most, though, was what June Lister said. She's got a place near the fire road, closest to where the light had been. She told me she woke up to her house shaking quietly. Not like an earthquake, more like the walls were vibrating. She said it only lasted a minute, but when she looked out the back window, the woods were lit up like stadium lights. Her dog, Boomer, had been hiding under the bed, drooling and trembling, and wouldn't come out until morning. None of it made the news. We didn't get an explanation. The electric company said it was scheduled maintenance even though no one was warned. No trucks came, no workers. The outages were too wide, too sudden. It's been quiet since. No more lights, no hums. But now I don't take the trash out after dark. I don't stand on the porch and look at the sky. And when the power flickers, even just once, I feel my chest go tight and I wait to hear that low sound again. I was up in the Adirondacks last October, trying to get one last good hike in before the snow came. Took a week off work, rented this little cabin near Stillwater Reservoir. Nothing fancy, wood stove, no Wi-Fi, no cell signal unless I hiked up the ridge out back. That was kind of the point. I needed a break from everything. I brought my dog, Rook, a gangly black and white mutt I got from a rescue in Albany. He's usually nervous in new places, but he loves the woods. It happened on my third day out there. Weather had turned weird, warm for the season, but humid, like late August, not mid-fall. The leaves were mostly down, so the trail was slippery in places. I decided to take the side loop off Red Horse Trail, one that followed an old logging road. It wasn't on the main map, but the cabin owner had pointed it out to me, said it made for a quiet loop with almost no foot traffic. I left around 10:30 a.m., took my time, stopped for lunch near a creek. Rook was in high spirits, chasing squirrels and sniffing everything. I had planned to be back by 3. Sometime after noon, I noticed the trail got harder to follow. Not overgrown exactly, just vague. The ground had this thick carpet of wet leaves, and the trees started looking real similar in every direction. I wasn't worried. I had a compass, and the GPS on my phone usually worked once I climbed a bit. Still, I kept glancing around more than usual. That's when I stepped into it. There wasn't a visible line or anything. Just suddenly, the air felt different. Thicker, maybe. My ears popped. Not like on a plane, but sharp, both at once. Rook froze. Not like he heard something, more like he hit an invisible wall. His tail dropped, and he started backing up, but slowly, like he wasn't sure he was allowed. I called to him, but my voice sounded flat. That was the first thing that really rattled me. I could hear myself speak, but there was no echo, no forest sounds under it, no wind, no birds, nothing. Just me and Rook and this dead air. I stepped forward again, maybe 5 or 6 feet. It was like walking into a pressure bubble. My skin felt prickly, like when you stand too close to a TV with static. Rook stayed back. I turned to look at him and he wouldn't meet my eyes. Just stood there, stiff as a board, staring past me. I pulled my phone out, more out of habit than anything. No signal, as expected. But the clock said 2:47 p.m. I stared at it for a while. Last time I checked, it was just before 1 when I stopped for lunch. I couldn't figure it out. I hadn't been walking that long. I wasn't tired, I hadn't eaten again or taken a nap or anything. I remember the whole hike up to that point, but somehow I'd lost nearly 2 hours. I backed out the way I came. As soon as I crossed whatever threshold I'd stepped through, my ears popped again, this time in reverse, and the forest noise came rushing back. Wind in the branches, birds, a squirrel scampering off through the brush. Rook bolted toward me and pressed against my leg, shaking like he'd been cold, even though the air was warm. I stood there for a while, staring at the spot I'd just walked out of. From the outside, it didn't look any different. Same trees, same rocks, same light, but it felt wrong, like a place pretending to be a forest. Eventually, I tried to go around it. I figured maybe it was just a weird patch of weather or something, and I could loop around and get back on the trail. But no matter which way I went, I kept ending up back at the same spot. I tried going left for 10 minutes, marking trees with a bit of tape, bright orange stuff I always carry in my pack, but the tape would vanish after 20 yards. I tied one to a low branch and watched it. Took 10 steps forward, turned around, gone. I didn't like that. I turned around completely and followed my original trail back the way I came. It took me almost twice as long to get back to the creek. The sun was already behind the ridge by the time I made it to familiar ground. I didn't see another hiker all day. When I got back to the cabin, it was almost 6 p.m. My legs ached like I'd done a 20-mile loop, but my GPS tracker, which I'd set to record the hike, showed a total distance of only 5.4 miles. It cut off completely at 12:52 p.m., then resumed again at 3:06 p.m. from nearly the same coordinates. The part that stuck with me, and still does, was what happened that night. I was inside with the wood stove going, trying to calm Rook down. He kept pacing, wouldn't touch his food. He'd stare out the window, then go to the door, then back to the corner and lie down, only to get up again a minute later. I finally let him out to see if he had to go, and the second I opened the door, he bolted. I had to chase him down the trail with a flashlight. He stopped maybe 50 feet from the cabin, panting, hackles up, staring at the woods in the direction of that patch. The flashlight beam flickered, not like the battery was dying, more like interference. That doesn't make sense, I know, but it felt like the light itself was being pulled or bent. I turned back fast, and Rook followed without needing to be called. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to a high-pitched buzzing sound, real faint, almost like a dentist's drill off in the distance. It started low, grew a little, then cut out. Rook was sitting up, eyes fixed on the wall like he could see something moving outside. There was no light out there. No sound after the buzz stopped. Just stillness. I didn't go out. Next morning, I packed up early, cut the trip short. I told the cabin owner I wasn't feeling well. He didn't seem surprised, just nodded and said, "Happens sometimes." I haven't gone back. I worked nights at a distribution warehouse just outside of Sallisaw, Oklahoma for about 3 years. Mostly quiet shifts, especially after midnight. My job was to stay in the guard shack by the gate, log trucks as they came and went, and occasionally do a walk around the lot if something set off the motion lights. It was boring work, but I didn't mind it. Gave me time to read or watch stuff on my phone. The only other person on site most nights was Dave, the forklift tech who worked the swing shift. He usually left by 10 or 11 unless he got behind on maintenance. This happened in March last year. Cold, but not freezing. One of those clear, dry nights where the wind makes everything feel sharper. I remember because I'd brought leftover chili in a thermos and it actually stayed warm between the shack and my mouth. Around 1:30 a.m., I was watching some old episode of Dirty Jobs on my phone when one of the cameras in the northeast yard flicked over, motion activated. That in itself wasn't weird. Possums, wind, sometimes even the light flickering could trigger it. What was weird was what it showed. The yard lights cast this dull orange wash over everything. In the camera feed, just above the old shipping trailers lined along the fence, there was something hovering. I don't know how else to say it. It wasn't touching the ground. Maybe 10 or 12 feet up. Oval shape, dark center, and sort of a shimmer around the edges. Not glowing, not blinking, just like heat distortion, like what you'd see above asphalt on a hot day. I stared at it for a good 30 seconds without moving. I thought maybe it was a glitch, but nothing else on the screen was acting up. The camera wasn't frozen. I could see a flag near the gate barely fluttering in the wind. One of the motion lights blinked on near the middle lot, but the thing just hung there. No movement, no sound. I toggled the other cameras to see if I could catch it from a different angle. Camera 6 caught part of the trailer row too, but from the side, and there it was again, same height, same distance from the ground. It wasn't a lens thing. I flipped back to camera 4 and it was still there. So I radioed the main office line, mostly out of procedure. No one answered, which wasn't surprising. Then I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. It took me about a minute to get from the shack to that part of the yard. It's a long walk, especially at night. All gravel and stiff weeds along the edges. The trailers were dark and locked. Old units we didn't even use anymore. I kept looking up as I walked, expecting to see it again, but there was nothing in the sky. No sound, no lights, no trace of anything. I checked behind the trailers, peeked underneath. Nothing. Just a beer can and an old tarp someone had stuffed under the axles. I stood there for a while, trying to figure out what to do. I even waved the flashlight up toward the sky like an idiot, thinking maybe I'd see something catch the beam. But it was just empty air. When I got back to the shack, the monitor was still on the split screen. I rewound the footage to the time I'd seen it, 1:34 a.m. Nothing. The camera blipped for a second, like it lost signal, then jumped straight to 1:36. Clean jump. No error message. No recording in between. Just skipped it. Every camera was the same. All of them had a gap of exactly 1 minute and 52 seconds, give or take. I checked 3 times. I thought maybe I'd messed up the playback, so I saved a copy of the files and emailed them to myself, just in case. The software time-stamped the gaps automatically. Footage unavailable, no reason why. I checked the logs for system errors. Nothing listed. After that, the rest of the shift crawled by. I kept glancing at the monitors, hoping I'd see it again. But the yard stayed quiet. The wind picked up a little, and around 3, I saw a raccoon near the dumpster, but that was it. When morning rolled around, I told the day manager, Clive, what I'd seen. He's ex-military, very no-nonsense. He just gave me this blank look and said, "The cameras sometimes glitch when the cold snaps hit the wiring." I asked if that explained the exact missing time blocks on all feeds. He didn't answer. That night, I came in a little early to check the saved video from the day shift. No interruptions, no gaps. Everything worked like normal. It was only during my shift, that specific window. I watched the whole overnight feed twice. Nothing showed up again. A week later, the system auto-deleted the archive, as it always does after 7 days. I had the clips I emailed myself, but when I tried to open them on my laptop, the files were corrupted. I tried converting them, running repair tools. Nothing worked. Just broken data. I asked Clive if the external hard drives had backups. He said we didn't have the budget for that. The weirdest part came about a month after. I was walking past the fence line near the trailers again, mid-shift, just stretching my legs. That corner of the yard always gave me the creeps after what happened, but I forced myself to walk it. Felt stupid being scared of nothing. I noticed the gravel there looked different. Not disturbed, not dug up, just flatter, smoother, like it had been packed down without anything driving over it. It wasn't muddy, no tracks, but the ground was tighter in a perfect circle about 10 feet across. Not freshly laid gravel, just pressed. Like weight had sat there a while and then vanished. I didn't mention that part to anyone. I didn't think it would help. I worked that job another 6 months before I transferred to a different site. Never saw anything like that again. I was driving back from my sister's place in Dighton, cutting through the back roads like I always do to avoid the tolls. It was close to 1 a.m., early March. Cold, but not snowing. I remember that specifically because there was a weird mist hugging the fields. Not quite fog, just a low-lying haze. The kind that doesn't really affect visibility but makes the world look off, somehow quieter than it should be. I was about halfway between Westport and Tiverton, middle of nowhere. Just 2-lane asphalt, no lights, trees on both sides like walls. I had the heater on low and the radio tuned to some oldie station out of Providence. It was playing Baby Come Back or something like that. I wasn't really listening, just kind of zoning out. Then the song cut off mid-chorus. Not a fade, just gone. Silence for maybe 3 seconds, and then this sound started up. It wasn't static, not quite. It was more like a rush of air layered with whispers. Not clear, not words I could understand. It was like 10 people whispering at once in another room with the door shut. Nothing about it felt like a normal signal. I thought maybe I'd drifted out of range of the station, but when I hit the seek button, it just bounced between identical versions of the same sound. Every frequency, FM, AM, didn't matter. All of it was that same hiss-whisper mix. I figured something was wrong with the radio. I shut it off, then back on. Still the same. Unplugged my phone to try Bluetooth. Nothing. It wouldn't connect. The screen on the dash just froze like it was stuck loading. I pulled over about a mile later, more out of frustration than anything. No shoulder, just a patch of grass where a dirt path split off into the woods. I killed the engine and sat there, listening. Everything outside was dead quiet. No crickets, no wind, not even the usual ticking from the engine cooling down. The radio was still on. That same static whispering coming from the speakers. Lower now, but still there. I stepped out of the car to see if maybe there was interference from something nearby. I don't even know what I thought I was going to find. The second I closed the door, it hit me how cold it was. Not freezing, but colder than it should have been for March. And the mist was thicker there. It clung to my clothes the way ocean air does, but there was no salt, no smell at all. I stood by the driver's side and looked around. No lights in either direction. No houses. No movement. I tried my phone. No signal. Not even the emergency SOS icon. That part bothered me more than the radio. I'd driven that road plenty of times. There was always at least one bar. I got back in the car and kept going. Slowly. The mist wasn't letting up, and I was starting to feel this pressure in my ears, like when you're driving up a mountain. It wasn't painful, just enough to notice. I cracked the window to equalize it, but nothing changed. I made it another 5 or 6 miles before I started seeing those weird light reflections, the kind that flash off your windshield from nowhere. Except they weren't coming from behind me. They were in front, flickering just past the trees. Not headlights. More like glints, random and fast, like someone waving a mirror around. I slowed down, but didn't stop. I didn't want to stop. The radio got louder, all on its own. I hadn't touched the dial. The whispers were clearer now, but still not words. I swear I heard a voice say something like turn, just once, and then it went back to the noise. I checked the volume. It was at 5, same as before, but it sounded like 20. I reached over to shut it off completely, but the screen stayed lit. Frozen again. Just the station number, 91.1, and that noise, louder than ever. That's when I saw someone standing on the side of the road. Not walking, not flagging me down, just standing still a few feet from the white line. I hit the brakes hard. My lights hit them. It was a guy in a hoodie, hood up, jeans soaked to the knees. He wasn't facing me. He was turned toward the woods, arms down at his sides. Not moving. I stopped about 30 yards back. Didn't get out, didn't honk. Just sat there with the car idling and the noise blasting from the speakers. I looked down to kill the radio again, and when I looked back up, he was gone. Not walked away. Gone. The spot where he'd been was empty. No movement in the trees. No sound. Nothing. I backed up, slowly at first, then faster. I didn't want to pass that spot. No real reason, just instinct. I turned around in someone's gravel driveway about a quarter-mile back and headed the way I came. The mist started thinning out after a few minutes. The pressure in my ears eased up. About a mile later, the radio suddenly switched stations like it had just unfrozen. Started playing commercials for a used car lot. My phone buzzed with a backlog of notifications. Everything came back to life like nothing had happened. I pulled off at a 24-hour gas station on Route 6, sat in the lot for maybe 20 minutes with the engine running. Didn't go inside, just sat there. The radio worked fine. Bluetooth worked. Phone had full bars. I've driven that road since. Once during the day, once again late at night, just to check. Nothing strange either time. No mist, no guy on the roadside. Radio stayed normal. I don't drive it anymore though. Even during the day, it feels off, like I'm not supposed to be there. I was flying a Cessna 182 back from Reading to Medford just before sunset. I'd done that route maybe 50 times, mostly ferrying parts or small packages for a shop my cousin runs. Nothing fancy. I'd taken off late because of a holdup with the cargo, and I remember being kind of annoyed about it since I didn't want to be landing in the dark. The weather was clear, a little hazy to the west, but smooth air and good visibility. It was just me up there. No co-pilot, no passengers. I had one crate about the size of a microwave strapped in the back. I checked everything twice before takeoff, like I always do. Radios, transponder, fuel altimeter, everything clean. I filed VFR and stayed around 7,500 feet once I leveled out. No issues, no chatter except a little traffic out of Sacramento way. I first noticed it just past Shasta. I was maybe 15 minutes north, somewhere over the forest between Dunsmuir and the state line. It started as a little glint in the corner of my right side window. Not bright, not blinking, just this pale yellow dot floating a few hundred feet off my wing. My first thought was that it was another plane, maybe someone coming in from the west at an angle, but I scanned and didn't see any nav lights. No strobes, no fuselage, nothing solid, just that one glow. I radioed a position check and asked if anyone had traffic at my 10 o'clock. Tower said negative. Nothing on radar. I tried not to dwell on it, but I kept glancing over and it was still there. Same distance, same speed, just tracking with me like it was pacing me. I turned 10 degrees east to see if it'd break off. Nothing. It adjusted too. Exact same angle, same relative distance. Not jerky like a drone, not fast like a jet, just smooth, like it was matching me perfectly. That went on for a solid 5 minutes. Then I did something kind of stupid. I banked hard to the left, a tight turn I wouldn't normally do unless I was trying to avoid something. Not dangerous, but sharp enough that I expected the thing to overshoot or fall back. It didn't. It matched me. It stayed locked in the same position relative to my wing, smooth as glass. I don't even know how to describe the movement. It wasn't aggressive or fast, but it was too precise, way too precise. Whatever it was, it had no trouble keeping up with me no matter what I did. By now, I'd started to sweat a little. I was gripping the yoke too tight and trying to keep my breathing steady. I keyed the mic again and asked Medford Tower if they had anything in my vicinity. I probably sounded a little rattled. They came back calm, said there was no known traffic, no radar blips, nothing visual reported. I didn't respond. I just stared out at the thing. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a basketball, but it gave off this really soft glow. Not like a spotlight or a flashlight, more like a lantern behind frosted glass. Pale yellow, maybe a hint of green, no sound, no flicker, and still no solid object around it. Just that light. I wanted to believe it was some kind of drone, maybe a test unit, something high-end, but it didn't have the movement for that. Drones wobble or surge forward a bit when they adjust. This thing just glided, like it was floating on water. It stayed with me for another 10 miles. Then, just as I started to descend toward Medford, it drifted back behind the plane. I craned my neck trying to see it, but it was behind the wing and out of view. I expected it to either come up on the other side or disappear completely, but it didn't do either. It just wasn't there anymore. Gone. Like flipping a switch. I called Tower again and requested a visual confirmation on final. They gave me clearance, no mention of any anomalies. I landed clean, taxied over to the hangar, and shut everything down. By the time I got out, it was fully dark. No lights in the sky, no sound. I did a full walk around on the plane before leaving, just out of habit. Everything looked fine. No burns, no scratches, no weird heat anywhere. The crate in the back was still latched tight. The guy from the shop met me at the hangar, made some joke about my hair sticking up, asked if the wind had been that bad. I didn't laugh. Later that night, I checked the flight data and radio logs. My position reports were all there, but nothing on the tapes about unknown traffic or unusual visuals. I called the tower the next day and asked if they'd pulled anything from radar in that area around my flight path. They hadn't. Said the skies were clear, not even a weather balloon. I tried to let it go, told myself it had to be some kind of atmospheric effect, maybe sunlight bouncing off something, even though it tracked me well after sunset. Lacey, my wife, told me not to obsess. She's right, probably. But I can't stop thinking about how it mirrored every single movement. Like it wasn't just following me, it was watching. We'd set up camp just off the trail, a couple miles past where the marked path ends. Not way out in the middle of nowhere, but remote enough that we didn't see or hear anyone else the whole time we were out there. It was me and my girlfriend, Lacey, and our dog, Pinto. A wiry little mutt with one floppy ear and way too much energy. It was early October, dry and cold enough at night to need layers, but not freezing. The days were clear, the nights cloudless. We picked that weekend mostly because the forecast said it'd be perfect stargazing weather, and we'd both been kind of burnt out from work. Lacey's a nurse, I do freelance construction. We'd both been running on fumes. We got to the trailhead around noon on Saturday, hiked a couple hours under the trees, and found a clearing on a slight slope, surrounded on three sides by tall pines. You could just barely see a patch of sky through the canopy. We pitched the tent, made some instant coffee, and sat around until dusk. Pinto chased moths and sniffed every inch of the perimeter like it was a job. Around 9, we had a little fire going and had just started heating up canned chili when we noticed how quiet it had gotten. I know that sounds like a thing people say, but I mean it literally. No bugs, no breeze, no rustling branches. Pinto was standing real still, his ears up, staring off into the trees behind the tent. His tail wasn't tucked or anything, but he wasn't wagging either, just alert. Lacey called his name and he didn't budge. I walked over and touched his back. He flinched a little, like he'd been somewhere else in his head. Then he just kind of shook it off and went back to sniffing near the fire. I remember saying something like, "Guess he heard a squirrel drop dead," and we laughed and kept cooking. About an hour later, after we'd eaten and doused the fire, we climbed into the tent and left the rainfly half off so we could see the stars. Pinto rolled up between us. It was dead still out, no wind at all, just a little warmth still left in the sleeping bags and that dry, cold biting at the tip of your nose. We weren't even talking, just lying there looking up. I don't know what time it was exactly when I noticed the stars looked wrong. Not missing, but just off. It took me a second to figure it out. There was a patch of sky, maybe the size of my outstretched hand, where the stars had kind of dimmed. like someone had turned down the brightness in that one spot. At first, I thought I'd be a thin cloud I just couldn't see in the dark. Then the patch started moving, slowly, almost like it was drifting, but too steady, too linear to be a cloud. I sat up a little, squinting through the mesh of the tent. Lacey must have noticed me shifting because she whispered, "What's up?" I didn't answer right away. I was trying to make sense of what I was seeing. As it got closer overhead, I could tell it wasn't a patch of sky. It was something blocking the stars, not reflecting anything, not giving off light. Just a shape, totally black, gliding silently across the sky. It was a triangle, a perfect one, or close to it. Long and flat and wide, with a faint light at each corner, pale yellow, almost dimmer than the stars. They didn't blink or flicker, they just held steady. No sound, no hum, no wind. Pinto's head was up again, not growling, not whining, just staring. I said, "Do you see that?" And Lacey nodded. She was sitting up now too. Her face looked pale in the dark. We both kept watching it move overhead. It wasn't huge, not like those football field-sized ones people talk about sometimes, but it was bigger than a plane, and a lot lower. I'd guess maybe 500 feet up, maybe less. It moved slow, real slow, like it was cruising. Took maybe 20 seconds to go from one side of the clearing to the other. Then it kept moving east, still totally silent, until it disappeared past the tree line. No acceleration, no flash, just gone. We sat there for a long time after that, just sat looking up. I think we were both waiting for something else to happen. A second one. A sound. A plane chasing it. Nothing. I remember Lacey saying, "Should we go?" And I almost laughed. Go where? It was already almost midnight, pitch dark, and we were miles from the car. It didn't feel dangerous exactly, just off. Like the air had shifted, like something was watching us but not close enough to do anything. Eventually we laid back down, but neither of us slept much. Pinto kept sitting up every half hour or so, looking in the same direction that thing had gone. We didn't talk again until sunrise. When we packed up, everything felt normal again. Birds chirping, breeze in the trees, Pinto wagging his tail and rolling in leaves, like the woods had snapped back to regular forest mode. On the hike back, I kept turning around, not because I thought we were being followed, but just because. Like I was waiting to hear branches break behind us or see something move where it shouldn't. When we got back to the parking lot, there was one other car there, dusty and old, a beat-up Corolla that hadn't been there when we arrived the day before. The windshield was cracked, and there were leaves piled under the tires like it'd been parked for a while. I remember checking the plates. Out of state. Didn't think much of it at the time. That was almost a year ago. We've talked about it a couple times since, but not much. Lacey kind of avoids the subject. I asked her once if she thought it was a drone or some kind of military thing, and she just shrugged. Said if it was, they're way ahead of what we thought. I didn't report it. Didn't even tell my brother, and he's a pilot. Just felt too weird. Not because I'm afraid people wouldn't believe me, but because I don't totally believe it. I know what we saw, I just don't know what it was. The only thing that still sticks in my mind is how quiet it was. Not just the object, but the whole forest. Like something pressed pause. Like whatever that thing was, it didn't belong here, and the woods knew it. The storm came in fast. I'd just gotten home from work around 6, and the sky had already gone that weird greenish color it gets before a bad one rolls in. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on the house. I live out near the edge of town, where the streetlights thin out and the power lines dip low between the poles. When storms hit out here, they hit hard. I grilled a quick dinner while the wind picked up. By the time I sat down to eat, rain had started tapping at the windows and the sky was flashing every few seconds. Not much thunder at first, just lightning lighting up the clouds. That kind where the whole sky goes white for a second, like someone taking a photo with the flash on. Around 7, the power flickered once, then went out completely. I sat there in the dark with my plate for a minute, listening to the wind shove itself against the side of the house. My phone still had some charge, so I used it as a flashlight and cleaned up the kitchen. I wasn't too worried. Outages happen pretty regularly out here when trees go down. It was when I stepped out onto the porch to smoke that I noticed it. The rain had backed off a little, and there was this thick layer of clouds overhead, lit up now and then by the storm. I was just standing there, watching it. I've always liked storms. The way everything else goes quiet, except for the wind and the distant thunder. One of the flashes lit up the sky, and I saw something up in the clouds, but it didn't disappear with the lightning. It stayed there, a kind of shape. Not flat like a plane, rounder, almost like a pill standing upright, or a capsule. It was hard to tell how high up it was because the clouds were moving fast and thick, but it wasn't small. What struck me first was the color. It wasn't reflecting the lightning. It was glowing on its own. A dull silver, not like metal under a spotlight, but like it had light inside it. The glow sort of pulsed like it was breathing, slow and steady. I watched it for a solid 30 seconds before another flash lit up the sky again, and the thing was still there, exactly where it had been. No movement, no sound, just hanging there. I thought maybe it was a trick of the storm, a drone maybe, or a balloon. But it wasn't swaying, and it wasn't shaped like anything I'd seen fly. There weren't any blinking lights on it, and it was too smooth, too clean. I went back inside, got my binoculars from the closet, and came back out. When I focused on it, I could see that the pulsing wasn't regular. Sometimes it'd dim for a while, then get brighter again, almost white-hot before fading back to silver. It didn't look like any light I'd seen come from a machine. Then, as I was watching, it started to rotate. Very slowly. Not spinning fast, just a slow, steady turn, like it was adjusting itself. But there wasn't any sound, no rumble, no wind shifting. It just pivoted a little and stopped. Then all the hair on my arms stood up. It wasn't thunder. There wasn't a boom or a crack. It was just this low pressure in the air, like something had moved through it, but without actually touching anything. I took a step back from the porch rail and realized the crickets had stopped. No insects, no frogs. Even the wind had gone still. Just the sound of the rain dripping off the roof and that quiet pulsing glow in the clouds. I backed into the house and shut the door. Not slammed, just closed it slowly. I left the porch light off. From the living room window, I could still see it, just barely, through the trees. Same position, same shape, same soft glow, barely changing now. It stayed like that for maybe 5 more minutes. I just stood there watching. Then, without any warning, it started to fade. Not blink out. Fade. Like it was being swallowed by the clouds, but nothing around it was moving. The glow got dimmer and dimmer until it was gone. Not behind anything. Just gone. And about 10 seconds later, the thunder started again, like someone had hit play on the weather. Wind picked up, rain started coming down in sheets, and that normal, chaotic feel of a storm came back all at once. A branch hit the roof, my porch light flickered and came back on. The crickets started chirping again like they just remembered what they were doing. Power came back around 11. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept looking out the window, checking the clouds. I didn't see anything else. The next morning, I drove out to the store and stopped to grab gas. I asked the guy working if the storm had knocked out power for everyone. Whole strip went dark, he said. Couple transformers blew. Lightning hit them directly. I asked if anyone else had seen anything weird in the sky. He just looked at me and said, "Weird how?" I didn't know what to say to that. I just shrugged and said, "Never mind." The transformers were 2 streets over from my house. I drove past them. One of the poles was scorched, blackened like it had been burned from the inside. No trees nearby, no wires down. That's all. Nothing ever showed up in the paper, no weather anomalies reported. No one else mentioned anything. I haven't seen anything like it again. But that shape, that glowing, I think about it more than I'd like to admit. I was out on the north side of the Eagle River Trail, just past where the main path splits, and the ridge starts to slope up toward the overlook. It was early September, and the weather was decent, cool but not cold, mostly clear sky. I'd gone out solo that afternoon, just trying to stretch my legs after a rough work week. I wasn't planning to do anything too strenuous, just an out and back before it got dark. I'd been hiking for about 2 hours when I stopped near a switchback to drink some water and take in the view. The valley below looked almost fake. All those deep greens and blues and not a sound except wind and maybe the distant rush of the creek. I wasn't thinking about anything important, mostly just enjoying the quiet. That's when I noticed something move behind the far ridge across from me. It wasn't dramatic, just a small, sudden glint of light, like metal catching the sun. At first, I figured it was a plane, but it wasn't moving sideways, it was rising, slowly at a straight upward angle. I watched it come up from behind the ridge. It was silver, smooth, kind of like a pill shape, but flatter on top. No wings or fins or rotors. It didn't spin or wobble, just rose straight up, like it was being lifted on a wire, completely silent. I stood there frozen with my water bottle halfway to my mouth, just watching it. Once it cleared the ridge, maybe 300 or 400 feet above it, it stopped, just hovered in place. I remember checking my watch out of habit. It was 4:42 p.m. Then, maybe 5 seconds later, it shot straight up into the sky. No buildup, no noise, just gone, like something yanked it upward. I followed it with my eyes as long as I could, but it disappeared into the blue so fast it was like watching a stone fall into deep water. There was nothing after that. No echo, no wind, no birds spooked out of the trees. Everything just went back to normal. I stood there for another minute or two, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, but there wasn't much to work with. It wasn't shaped like a drone, wasn't a balloon. I've seen plenty of those in Anchorage, and nothing man-made I know of moves like that. I didn't head back right away. I felt weird, but not scared, mostly curious. I kept hiking a little further up toward the ridge. I wasn't planning to go all the way to the top, just closer to where I'd seen it rise from. Not that I thought I'd find anything. It was just one of those things you do on autopilot when you're trying to convince yourself it wasn't as strange as it looked. About 30 minutes later, I stopped again. Same general direction as before, just higher up. I sat on a rock and took out a protein bar. That's when I noticed my watch said 7:03. That didn't make any sense. I thought maybe I'd misread it earlier, so I pulled out my phone to double check the time. It also said 7:03, and the sun was a little lower than it should have been. Shadows had stretched way out. I stood there trying to remember how long I'd actually been walking. It hadn't felt like more than maybe an hour since I saw the thing rise. Maybe less. But 2 full hours had passed. I didn't sit or nap or zone out. I was walking steadily most of the time. But now I was behind schedule and I'd have to jog part of the way back to beat the dark. I didn't panic, but something about it started to bother me more than it had before. Like I was only just realizing how quiet it was again. No birds, no insects, not even the wind this time. It was that kind of quiet where your ears start to ring a little. Then I heard a crack, like a stick breaking. It came from behind me, maybe 20 feet up the trail. I turned around, expecting to see another hiker or maybe a deer, but the trail was empty. Nothing moved. Trees were still. I waited another 10 seconds. Then I picked up my pace and started heading back down. I didn't run, but I wasn't taking my time either. I kept checking behind me every couple minutes. I don't usually get nervous out there. I've hiked that trail dozens of times, but I felt like something was off. I didn't see anyone, though. About halfway back, I paused again at the same overlook where I'd first seen the thing. The sun had dropped more, and the air felt cooler. I looked back toward the ridge, and there it was. Same silver shape, but this time it was descending. Slowly. Not falling, but coming down with the same smooth motion it had used going up. Straight down, no sound, no wobble. It was around the same height as before, a few hundred feet above the ridge, and coming back down into the exact same spot it had risen from. I didn't take my eyes off it. I didn't even blink. It was real. I'm as sure of that as I've ever been about anything. It sank behind the trees, out of view. I watched for a long time after that, but it didn't come back up. Nothing else moved. I kept waiting to hear something. Branches cracking, an engine, even the sound of a door shutting. But there was nothing. Just more of that weird, stretched out silence. Eventually, I kept walking. My legs felt heavy. I wasn't even thinking about what it could have been anymore. Just trying to get back before dark. My head was kind of buzzing, like I'd gone too long without eating. When I got to the trailhead, there were only 2 other cars left in the lot. One of them was mine. The other had Washington plates, no one inside. I didn't see anyone else around. The air smelled a little metallic, not strong but noticeable. I thought it might be the creek or something in the soil. I got in my car and sat there for a while before starting it. I didn't check my phone again. I didn't take any pictures. I didn't want to explain what I'd seen. I didn't even know how I'd start. The drive home was quiet, no traffic. I remember watching the treetops in the rearview mirror more than the road. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about how precisely it moved, how it had come back to the same place 2 hours later like nothing had happened in between. I've gone hiking in that area again since then, but never alone, and I haven't seen anything like that again. Nothing close. But I still think about that stretch of time I lost. I don't have any explanation for it. The watch, the phone, they matched. It wasn't a dead battery or a glitch. It was just 2 hours gone.